Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the shadowed corridors of ancient tombs where dust motes dance in air that hasn't moved for 3,000 years. You're standing at the threshold of a burial chamber, and the difference between what lies in the women's graves versus the men's tells a story nobody taught you in school. The women prepared. Oh, how they prepared. While their husbands and brothers approached death with a shrug and a hastily packed bag, women spent decades, sometimes their entire lives, gathering, crafting and arranging the items that would carry them safely into whatever came next. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, what time it is in your corner of the world, or maybe just say hello. I love hearing from you. Now let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You're crouching now beside an excavation site in Thebes, Egypt, watching as archaeologists carefully brush away limestone chips from two adjacent tombs. The first belongs to a mid-level administrator named Amenhotep. Inside, you count maybe 30 items, a few pottery vessels, one decent bronze mirror, a wooden headrest, some basic tools, and a collection of shabti figures. Those little servant statues meant to do his work in the afterlife. Not bad. Respectable even. He probably spent a month or two gathering these things when he felt death approaching. Maybe asked his son to pick up a few extras at the market. Then you move 3 meters to the left, and the air changes. This is Mutamwia's tomb, Amenhotep's wife. The chamber is the same size, but you can barely see the floor. There are 214 catalogued items. 214! The archaeologist will spend 6 months just documenting what's here. Mutamwia has multiple complete sets of everything. 7 different wig boxes, each containing elaborately braided hairpieces. 43 jars of preserved cosmetics, some of which analysis will reveal she mixed herself using recipes passed down from her grandmother. 90 feet of the finest linen, wrapped and labelled by quality, jewellery organised by function, protective amulets separate from decorative pieces separate from items meant specifically for the journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. You pick up the inventory scroll. Carefully, with gloved hands, the conservator is watching, and you notice something remarkable. Dates. Mutamwia started assembling this collection when she was 19 years old. She died at 52, 33 years of preparation. Amenhotep, according to his son's accounting papyrus, began his preparations 8 months before his death. 8 months versus 33 years. This isn't an isolated case. You're walking now through the climate-controlled storage facility, where they keep hundreds of tomb inventories, and the pattern repeats like a drum beat. Women's tombs, elaborate, extensive, meticulously planned. Men's tombs, functional, adequate, assembled late. At first you think maybe this is about wealth. Perhaps the women whose tombs survive were simply richer. But no, when you control for social class, the disparity remains. A peasant woman's grave contains 3 times as many personally prepared items as a peasant man's. A noblewoman's tomb dwarfs her husband's in both quantity and quality of grave goods. Historians still argue whether this difference stems from women having more time to prepare, greater anxiety about the afterlife, or simply better organisational skills. But you're starting to suspect it's something deeper, something about how men and women approached the fundamental terror of mortality. The candle flickers beside you as you turn the pages of a journal article written by Dr. Sarah Chen, an archaeologist who spent 15 years comparing grave goods across Mediterranean cultures. She found the same pattern in Mycenaean Greece, in Etruscan Italy, in Bronze Age Anatolia. Everywhere she looked, women prepared more carefully, more extensively, more thoughtfully for death than men did. The ratio held steady across cultures. Women's tombs contained roughly 3 times as many personally prepared items. Not inherited wealth, not things thrown in by grieving relatives, but items the deceased themselves had gathered, made, or commissioned. You're wondering now about the emotional weight of this preparation. Imagine being a woman in ancient Egypt, walking through the market at 25 and stopping at a stall selling amulets. You pick up a heart scarab, that essential protection that keeps your heart from testifying against you in the Hall of Judgment. You buy it. You take it home. You place it in the wooden chest where you keep your afterlife provisions, and you absolutely know that this chest will follow you for decades. You'll open it on your 30th birthday and add a set of canopic jars you commissioned. You'll open it at 40 and place inside the Book of the Dead scroll you saved 3 years to afford. Every addition is a small acknowledgement that yes, this will end, and no, you won't leave it to chance. Meanwhile, your husband Kenty owns exactly 0 items specifically designated for his tomb. He's not in denial exactly. He's just not worried. When you ask him about it, he waves a hand. "I'll take care of it," he says. "There's time." Spoiler alert. He will not take care of it with anything approaching your level of thoroughness. He'll panic buy a few things in his final year, and his sons will scramble to fill his tomb with borrowed items and family cast-offs. The gender divide is so stark that archaeologists can often guess the sex of remains before any skeletal analysis simply by looking at the grave goods organisation. Women's items show signs of long-term curation, pieces from different decades arranged in a coherent system, items carefully wrapped in progressively older styles of linen, labels in aging handwriting. Men's items look like someone packed for a weekend trip the night before, hastily gathered, inconsistently protected, sometimes still in the merchant's original packaging. Here's the thing that keeps you awake tonight. The women were right to prepare. In Egyptian belief, the afterlife was a complex bureaucratic nightmare, involving multiple trials, dangerous passages, and the very real possibility of being eaten by Amit the Devourer if your heart weighed heavier than a feather. Having the right spells, the correct amulets, the proper provisions, these weren't luxuries, they were survival tools. The women understood this in their bones. They prepared as if their eternal souls depended on it, because according to their beliefs, they absolutely did. The men, they seemed to approach death with the same energy they brought to asking for directions, confident they'd figure it out when they got there. And maybe they did. Or maybe the afterlife is populated with men wandering around trying to borrow a cup of natron from better prepared souls. You're standing in a linen workshop in the Fayum district, and the sound of wooden looms clicking fills the humid air. It's approximately 1500 BCE, and you're watching something remarkable unfold. 6 women sit in a row, their fingers moving with the mechanical precision of people who've performed this motion 10,000 times. They're weaving burial bandages, not for themselves, not yet, but adding to their accumulating stores. The woman nearest you is named Nefertiti, not the famous one, and she's been weaving afterlife linen since her first menstruation. She's now 47. The chest in her home contains approximately 4,000 metres of bandages in various grades, from the coarsest outer wrappings to strips so fine you could read hieroglyphs through them. Her husband Panassi, a competent carpenter, owns exactly 0 metres of burial linen. When you ask him about this, he looks genuinely confused by the question. "I'll get some when I need it," he tells you, and goes back to planing a cedar plank. Historians still argue whether this represents male optimism, denial, or a fundamental difference in how the sexes processed mortality. But the evidence is overwhelming. Women spent their healthy years preparing for death while men spent their dying days shopping. The economics of this disparity are staggering. An average Egyptian woman of middling status would produce or purchase approximately 5,000 to 6,000 metres of linen specifically for her burial over her lifetime. This represented roughly 300 hours of labour per year, nearly an hour per day, dedicated solely to afterlife preparation. Men? The papyrus records from the House of Death in Thebes show that most male customers arrived within 3 months of their demise. suddenly desperate for supplies they'd had decades to accumulate. You're holding now a transaction record from a linen merchant named Hennut Meyer, who ran a thriving business in Memphis. Her customer logs reveal something darkly funny. 83% of her male clients were purchasing emergency death packages, while already visibly ill, often negotiated by worried family members. Her female clients, by contrast, made small, steady purchases over years. "The women come in spring and autumn," she wrote in a letter to her sister, "regular as the Nile. The men come in winter, sweating and desperate, and their sons come in summer carrying their father's ashes, asking if we have anything pre-made. The quality difference is profound. You're examining 2 mummy wrappings under the careful supervision of a museum conservator. The first belonged to a woman named Takayet. The linen is exquisite. Multiple grades expertly woven, the finest layers showing a thread count that rivals modern luxury sheets. Chemical analysis reveals the fabric was produced over a span of at least 20 years. The earliest pieces show dye techniques that had fallen out of fashion by the time the newest pieces were woven. Takayet had been collecting, adding to her stores, upgrading her provisions as she aged, and could afford better materials. The second mummy is Takayet's brother, Panza. His wrappings are adequate. They're functional. They'll technically preserve his body for eternity, but they're obviously rush job work. Consistent weaving quality suggests they were all produced within the same season, probably purchased as a bulk lot. There's no layering strategy, no gradual improvement in quality toward the body. Someone bought a bunch of linen and wrapped a corpse. The job got done. You're noticing something else as you examine dozens of mummies. Women's wrappings show signs of personal involvement. Small irregularities in weaving patterns that suggest different makers. Labels written in feminine hand. Occasionally a woven-in hair or a thumbprint preserved in resin. Evidence that these women literally touched and arranged their own burial supplies while alive. Men's wrappings are anonymous, professional, done by hired mortuary workers who'd never met the deceased until he arrived as a body. The sheer volume of linen required for proper mummification is something you don't appreciate until you see it piled up. A standard middle-class mummification requires roughly 400 to 600 metres of bandages. That's 4 to 6 football fields of fabric. For the wealthy, the numbers explode. Tutankhamun's mummy used over 3,000 metres. That's 1.8 miles of linen wrapped around one teenage king. Someone had to produce all that fabric, and the evidence suggests that elite women often supervised the weaving of their own burial textiles, treating it as a decades-long project. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Women didn't just prepare their own supplies, they prepared for their families. Tomb inventories frequently show women had accumulated linen for deceased children, aging parents, and yes, their husbands. A fascinating papyrus from the 19th dynasty records a woman named Takat, who, upon her death at age 62, left behind enough linen to properly bury herself and 3 other family members. Her son wrote, with what sounds like exasperated affection, "Mother prepared for deaths that had not yet occurred and perhaps never would, yet when father died suddenly we were grateful. Men, on the other hand, rarely prepared for anyone but themselves, and barely managed that. Estate documents show that when men died, their burial costs often exceeded their set-aside provisions by 50 to 300%. The family had to scramble for funds, borrow from neighbours, sell property. When women died, their funerals typically came in under budget, and there was often surplus material that could be saved for the next generation. You're walking through the market district now, 3,000 years dissolved, and you're watching a scene that happened weekly in ancient Egypt. A woman in her 30s examines linen at a stall, running her fingers over the weave, checking for consistency. She haggles briefly, then purchases 20 metres of medium-grade fabric. The merchant wraps it carefully, and she tucks it under her arm, another addition to her growing collection. At the next stall, a desperate son argues with a different merchant, trying to negotiate a bulk discount on everything needed to bury his father, who died 4 days ago. The merchant is sympathetic but firm. Rush orders cost extra, and no, he can't deliver by tomorrow. The women were playing a long game, and they were playing it alone. Their preparations were invisible, accumulating in chests and storage rooms, growing metre by metre, year by year. Meanwhile, their husbands lived as if death were a distant concern that could be addressed with a quick shopping trip. And when death finally came knocking, guess whose preparation paid off? You're kneeling beside an open cosmetic box that hasn't seen daylight in 3,200 years, and the scent, impossibly, still lingers. Myrrh, frankincense, something floral you can't quite identify. The box belonged to a woman named Hanutawi, a merchant's wife from the Middle Kingdom, and inside you count 27 separate containers of cosmetics. 27. There are grinding pallets for coal, jars of red ochre for lips and cheeks, pots of galena for eye paint, vessels of scented oils, blocks of cleansing natron, bronze tweezers, razors, and 3 different mirrors, bronze, polished copper, and one precious silver one that still reflects your face with ghostly clarity. Her husband's tomb, excavated simultaneously just 10 metres away, contains one cosmetic item, a basic bronze razor, probably thrown in by his son as an afterthought. Welcome to the most revealing divide in afterlife preparation, the cosmetic gap. Women packed their tombs as if the afterlife were a social occasion requiring full presentation. Men packed as if they were going camping and might need to shave once. The difference isn't just about vanity, it's about identity, self-perception, and fundamentally different ideas about what it meant to exist for eternity. You're reading now from the Papyrus of Ani, one of the most complete books of the dead ever discovered. In the vignettes showing the deceased approaching the gods for judgment, something interesting emerges. The women are always depicted in full cosmetic glory, elaborately painted eyes, reddened lips, adorned with jewellery and wearing their finest linen. The men? Clean-shaven, sure, but otherwise unadorned. The women understood, it seems, that they'd be seen in the afterlife. They'd be judged not just morally, but socially. They prepared to show up. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming. In a study of 123 intact Middle Kingdom burials from the Theban necropolis, 97% of women's tombs contained extensive cosmetic equipment. Only 31% of men's tombs had anything beyond basic grooming tools. And here's the kicker. The women's cosmetics weren't just thrown in at burial. Chemical analysis shows many of these preparations were decades old, carefully stored and preserved. These women had been collecting their eternal beauty supplies for most of their adult lives. Hanutawi's coal pot, for instance, shows stratification, layers of pigment added at different times, like tree rings marking years. The bottom layer is rougher, cheaper quality. The middle layer show improvement. The top layer is practically art grade, ground so fine it would make modern cosmetic companies weep with envy. She'd been upgrading, improving, perfecting her afterlife makeup kit for an estimated 30 years. Do you remember Amenhotep from the first tomb we visited? His razor was purchased 3 weeks before his death, still bearing the merchant's mark. You're sitting now with Dr. Joanne Fletcher, the Egyptologist who literally wrote the book on ancient Egyptian hair and cosmetics. She's showing you something that makes your skin prickle. Look at this, she says, pointing to a cosmetic palette from the tomb of a woman named Nefertiti. Not that one either. See these use marks? These grooves from grinding pigments? This palette was used regularly for decades before being placed in the tomb. She was practicing, perfecting her technique, making sure she'd know exactly how to apply her afterlife makeup. Meanwhile, the men, if they prepared cosmetically at all, they did so with the enthusiasm of someone packing toiletries for a business trip. Grab the basics, toss them in a bag, done. The mirrors are particularly telling. Women's tombs contain multiple mirrors in various sizes and materials, often wrapped carefully in linen, sometimes with inscribed spells to ensure the mirror would work properly in the afterlife. Some mirrors show wear patterns suggesting they were used and treasured objects, carried to the grave as beloved possessions. Others appear unused, purchased specifically for the tomb, backup mirrors in case the primary one failed in the afterlife. Because imagine dying and spending eternity unable to see yourself. For these women, that was apparently a terrifying prospect. Men's mirror ownership? Rare. When present, usually singular, often unadorned, and showing minimal signs of use. Historians still argue whether this reflects differing grooming standards or something deeper about self-image and the desire to maintain identity beyond death. But you're starting to lean toward the latter. Here's something that will keep you thinking as you drift towards sleep. The cosmetic preparations weren't just about beauty. They were about transformation, protection, and power. Kohl wasn't merely decorative. It protected against eye diseases and had magical properties that warded off evil. Red ochre symbolized life and vitality. Green eye paint connected the wearer to Wadjet, the protective cobra goddess. Every pigment had layers of meaning, practical and mystical. The women who carefully assembled these cosmetic arsenals weren't being vain. They were armouring themselves for eternity. You're examining now a cosmetic spoon carved in the shape of a swimming woman, used for holding unguents. It belonged to a teenager named Mutnofret, who died at 16. Already her tomb contained 11 different cosmetic items, all carefully selected, some clearly gifts from her mother and grandmother. The women were teaching their daughters early, prepare your face for forever. The men taught their sons. Well, apparently they taught them that someone else would handle the details. There's something both touching and heartbreaking about these carefully curated cosmetic collections. You're holding a jar of scented oil, cassia and lotus, according to the residue analysis, that was sealed when its owner was 38. She died at 64. For 26 years this jar sat in her preparation chest waiting for the day she'd need it to anoint herself for eternity. Did she ever open it during those decades? Did she ever consider using it for a special occasion, then think, no, this is for afterward? What kind of discipline does it take to save your best things for when you're dead? The cosmetic boxes themselves are works of art. Elaborate inlays, multiple compartments, secret drawers, ivory hinges. These weren't storage, they were statements. I will be beautiful forever, they declared. I will recognize myself in the afterlife. I will not lose my identity to death. The boxes belonging to women of means could take master craftsmen months to create, commissioned years before any sign of illness, another piece of the elaborate preparation puzzle. Men's cosmetic storage, when it existed, was functional. Basic wooden boxes, simple designs, built to hold a few items without ceremony. You're laughing a little now, there in the dark, because you found a piece of ancient graffiti in a tomb worker's rest area. Someone, probably male, given the handwriting, scratched onto a limestone flake. My wife has 3 chests for death and I have none. She says I will regret this. The gods know she is probably right. Even 3,000 years ago they knew. The women were right to prepare, right to pack carefully, right to bring their entire cosmetic arsenal into eternity. 'Cause identity matters, presentation matters, and showing up to your eternal judgment with your eyeliner perfect, that's not vanity, that's victory. You're standing in a tomb antechamber that smells impossibly of bread, and you realize after a moment that what you're smelling is 3,000-year-old grain that has somehow, miraculously retained a ghost of its original scent. Around you, stacked in careful arrangements, are enough provisions to feed a family for years. Dried fish wrapped in palm leaves, sealed amphorae of wine with vintage dates still legible on the clay, baskets of emmer wheat, jars of honey that astonishingly haven't spoiled. Honey never does. There are haunches of preserved gazelle, bowls of figs, pomegranates desiccated into leathery ornaments of their former selves, and loaves of bread so perfectly preserved you can still see the baker's fingerprints in the crust. This is Lady Hanutmahit's tomb, and she has packed a feast for eternity. Not a meal, a feast. Multiple courses, variety, options. She's planned for breakfast, lunch and dinner in the afterlife, apparently forever. The inventory scroll lists 147 separate food items, arranged by type, labelled by quality, some marked with preparation instructions for the ka. The spiritual essence that would consume these offerings. You walk next door to her husband Neberman's tomb. He has 11 food items, 11. A few jars of beer, some grain, 3 questionable chunks of dried meat. It looks like what you'd grab from a gas station if you realised you forgot to eat lunch. He clearly subscribed to the someone else will handle the catering school of afterlife planning. The food divide is perhaps the most practical manifestation of the preparation gap, and it reveals something profound about how women and men thought about eternity. Women prepared as if the afterlife were a real place with real needs. Men prepared as if it were a metaphor that probably didn't require actual sandwiches. You're reading now from the tomb biography of a woman named Naunachta, a landowner from the Ramside period, who left behind one of the most detailed food preparation documents ever discovered. She began accumulating her afterlife provisions at age 27, after her first child was born. An event that apparently made mortality suddenly very real. Over the next 38 years until her death, she systematically gathered, preserved and stored food items for her tomb. The document lists annual additions. Year 3 of Ramesses III, 20 jars of honey from the Delta. Year 7, 53 loaves of the finest white bread, sealed in cedar boxes. Year 12, 6 amphorae of wine from my own vineyard, vintage noted. Naunachta was treating her afterlife like a pantry that needed constant restocking, even though she wouldn't access it for decades. Her husband's provisions, purchased entirely in the last 2 months of his life by his panicked eldest son. The variety in women's food offerings is staggering. You're looking at an inventory from a modest tomb belonging to a weaver named Takaru. She wasn't wealthy. Her tomb is small, her coffin simple, but her food selection would make a modern dinner party host jealous. 37 different food items spanning every major food group ancient Egyptians recognised. Bread in 6 varieties, beer in 4 strengths, 3 types of wine, fresh dates and dried dates, figs, grapes, both pressed and whole, lentils, chickpeas, barley porridge, roasted fowl, pickled fish, beef, goat, honey cakes, cheese, butter, olive oil, sesame oil, lettuce, onions, garlic, cucumbers and melons. She planned for variety, for preferences, for the possibility that she might want different things on different days in eternity. Her husband's tomb contains beer and bread. That's it. Beer and bread. The ancient Egyptian equivalent of assuming you can survive on pizza and energy drinks. Historians still argue whether women's elaborate food preparation reflects greater piety, more practical mindedness, or simply having more time to think about these things. But you're examining hundreds of tombs, and the pattern never varies. Women bring restaurants, men bring snacks. The preservation techniques are where things get really interesting. Women didn't just throw food in their tombs and hope for the best. They employed sophisticated preservation methods, some of which modern food scientists are still trying to fully understand. Honey as a preservative for meats, salt packing for fish, controlled desiccation for fruits, sealed ceramic containers with wax stoppers for liquids. Some of these food items have survived over 3 millennia in edible, well, theoretically edible condition. You're holding now a jar of honey from the tomb of Lady Chuyu, mother-in-law to Amenhotep III. The honey is over 3,400 years old. A brave, perhaps foolish, archaeologist in the 1920s tasted it and reported it was, quote, perfectly sweet, though one wouldn't want seconds. Chuyu had sealed this jar herself. According to the hieratic inscription on the wax cap, 32 years before her death. 32 years she kept this jar, designated for eternity, never breaking that seal for any living occasion. Men's food preservation tended toward put it in a jar and hope. Less thought, less technique, less survival rate. When modern archaeologists open men's tombs, the food is usually degraded beyond recognition. When they open women's tombs, they sometimes find meals that look like they were prepared last week. The ritual aspect of food preparation adds another layer. Women didn't just store food, they performed offering rituals over it while still alive, essentially pre-blessing their own afterlife meals. Tomb paintings show women presenting food to their own Ka statues, rehearsing the eternal cycle of offerings they hoped would sustain them after death. It's touching and slightly eerie, practicing your own funeral feast while you're still alive enough to enjoy cooking. You're looking at a particularly elaborate tomb painting now, and it shows something remarkable. A woman named Hennetmeyer, instructing her daughters in the preparation of offering foods. The hieroglyphs read, "She teaches them the correct ways so they may continue the offerings and so they may prepare for their own journeys." The women were creating multi-generational preparation systems, passing down not just recipes but entire philosophies of afterlife provisioning. The men, if they passed anything down, it was probably, "Hey, you'll figure it out." Here's something that makes you sad in a gentle, distant way. Many women's tombs contain small additional food caches specifically labelled for children who died young. A mother's tomb might have her main provisions, and then a smaller collection marked for my daughter Mutnofret, who left at age 7 should she hunger. These women were preparing to feed their dead children for eternity. They were bringing maternal care into the afterlife, making sure that even beyond death, their babies would have their favourite foods. Men's tombs occasionally reference dead children in paintings or inscriptions, but the physical provisions almost never there. The wine collections deserve special mention. Elite women often amassed wine cellars specifically for afterlife consumption, complete with vintage notes and vineyard records. One woman's tomb contained 43 amphorae of wine spanning 18 different vintages over 22 years. She'd been collecting wines like a sommelier preparing for the world's longest dinner party. Her husband's tomb had 4 amphorae of wine, all from the same year, probably bulk purchased. You're sitting now in the dark thinking about all these carefully preserved meals, these lovingly assembled feasts waiting in tombs for spirits to consume them. The Egyptians believed offerings could be eaten spiritually, that the Ka would extract the life force from the food, leaving the physical matter behind. Which means all this food, all this preparation, was for something invisible, unprovable, a matter of pure faith. And the women prepared anyway. They salted fish and sealed honey and labelled vintages and arranged bread in precise patterns because they believed, or hoped, or refused to take chances. They fed death itself just to be safe. The men assumed death would have a food truck. You're holding something that makes your chest tighten with unexpected emotion. A small cedar box no bigger than your palm, and inside it lies a carefully braided lock of hair wrapped in the finest linen. The hair is auburn, still glossy after 3,000 years, and the label reads, "My hair from my 16th year when it was most beautiful." The woman who saved this lock, a priestess named Nefertari, died at age 53. She kept this piece of her younger self for 37 years, designated not for any living purpose but for the afterlife, where she presumably wanted to remember, or be remembered as, the girl she'd been. Her tomb contained 6 more boxes like this. 7 total collections of hair spanning her entire life. Childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, motherhood, middle age, and the final years. She'd been documenting herself in hair, creating a timeline of her physical existence to carry into eternity. Alongside these precious locks, she'd packed 4 elaborate wigs, not the practical ones she wore in life, but ceremonial pieces constructed over years, some with hair donated by her daughters and sisters, woven together into literal family bonds. Her husband's tomb contains 0 hair-related items. He went into eternity bald or with whatever hair remained on his head at death. apparently unconcerned about follicular presentation in the afterlife. Welcome to one of the strangest and most revealing aspects of gendered afterlife preparation. The absolute obsession women had with hair, and the complete indifference men showed toward it. Hair was identity, beauty, power, and continuity all wrapped into keratin strands, and women treated it with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. You're examining now a wig box from the tomb of Lady Aset, and the craftsmanship is breathtaking. The box itself is sycamore wood inlaid with ivory and ebony, worth a small fortune. Inside, wrapped in protective linen, sits a wig that represents approximately 5 years of collection and construction. The hair comes from multiple donors. Chemical analysis reveals at least 7 different individuals, all female, likely family members. The braiding alone would have taken hundreds of hours. Each section is plaited in a different traditional style, and the whole thing is held together with beeswax and resin, secured with bronze pins, some of which are inscribed with protective spells. This wig was never worn in life. It was commissioned and constructed specifically for the tomb. Aset already owned several perfectly good wigs for daily use. This one was for eternity, and she wanted it perfect. Do you remember Pesa, the brother from earlier whose linen was so rushed? His tomb also lacks any hair provisions. Most men's tombs do. When asked about this disparity, one male scribe from the late period wrote in a letter to his sister, "You worry about hair that will not be seen. I worry about the judgment of my heart. We prepare differently." He sounds almost defensive, doesn't he? Like he knows his sister is right but doesn't want to admit it. The wig industry in ancient Egypt was enormous, and women were both the primary producers and consumers. Tomb paintings show workshops entirely staffed by women, braiding and weaving hair for both the living and the dead. The prices were substantial. A quality afterlife wig could cost as much as a year's grain supply for a small family. Women saved for these wigs the way modern people save for cars or houses. They were investments in eternal self-presentation. Historians still argue whether the hair obsession was purely aesthetic or had deeper religious significance, but the evidence suggests both. Hair was associated with sexuality, vitality, and personal power. To appear in the afterlife without proper hair, or worse, with the degraded hair of old age or illness, was apparently unthinkable for most women. They wanted to be recognized, to be beautiful, to be themselves in whatever came next. You're reading now from a remarkable papyrus letter written by a daughter to her deceased mother. It's part complaint, part prayer. "Mother, you left with such beautiful hair, 6 wigs and your own locks preserved. I have only begun collecting mine. Did you know how little time I would have? Could you not have prepared 1 wig for me?" The daughter died young apparently, and regretted not following her mother's example of early hair preparation. Even from beyond death, the mother's thoroughness was being praised and envied. The wigs themselves are masterpieces of ancient technology. You're looking at one under magnification now, and the complexity is staggering. Individual strands are bundled in groups of 3 to 7, coated in beeswax mixed with pine resin for preservation and shape retention, then braided in patterns that incorporate both decorative and structural elements. Some wigs have over 100,000 individual hair strands. Creating one was like building a textile monument to oneself. Men occasionally wore wigs in life, official occasions, ceremonies, that sort of thing, but they rarely packed them for the afterlife. When archaeologists find wigs in men's tombs, they're usually simple, functional pieces, probably grabbed at the last minute by a son who thought, "Should Dad have a wig? Yeah, probably, whatever's cheap." The preserved natural hair is where things get really personal. Women didn't just save their own hair, they saved hair from loved ones. A tomb might contain locks from a deceased daughter, a beloved sister, a mother who died decades earlier. These women were building hair archives, creating tangible connections to people they'd lost, perhaps hoping to reconstruct their family and the afterlife through these preserved strands, its genealogy written in keratin. family trees you could literally braid together. One tomb, belonging to the woman named Tuya, contains an entire chest dedicated to hair memories. Inside, 43 separate packets of hair, each labelled with a name and date. My mother Hanutui from her final illness. My daughter Nefret, her first cutting at age 3. My sister Mutamwia, taken before her wedding. My own hair from the year of the Great Flood. It's a tactile autobiography, a hair diary spanning 60 years of relationships and memories. Tuya died childless, according to her tomb biography, and you wonder if these preserved connections were meant to populate her afterlife, to ensure she wouldn't be alone in eternity. Her husband's tomb, excavated adjacent to hers, contains no preserved hair of any kind. Not his own, not family members, nothing. He brought himself and assumed that was sufficient. The hair care tools are another differentiator. Women's tombs overflow with combs, bone, wood, ivory, sometimes bronze, each designed for different hair types and styles. Hairpins by the dozen, some plain, some elaborately decorated. Curling rods heated over flames, razors for shaping, scissors for trimming, oils and unguents specifically for hair treatment. These weren't just packed randomly. They were organised in kits, arranged by function, ready for use in the afterlife as if the woman might need to style her hair for an important eternal occasion. Men's grooming tools, when present, rarely include hair-specific items beyond basic razors. They shaved, face, head, body, but they didn't style, preserve, or particularly care about their hair's afterlife presentation. You're drifting now, thinking about a woman sitting in a room at age 30, carefully braiding a lock of her own hair, wrapping it in linen, labelling it, and placing it in her death chest. What was she thinking? Did it feel morbid, or practical, or strangely comforting to be taking control of how she'd be remembered? Did she touch that lock sometimes in the following years, checking that it was still there, still perfect, still waiting? And what about the wig she commissioned, the hair she collected from daughters and sisters? Every strand was an act of hope or fear or both. Hope that the afterlife was real and she'd need these things, fear that she'd arrive unprepared and unrecognisable. The men simply didn't worry about it, and maybe that's okay. Maybe they had different priorities, different fears, but the tombs don't lie. The women brought their beauty, their identity, their very selves carefully preserved in hair. The men brought themselves and hoped that was enough. You're holding a papyrus scroll so long it requires 2 people to unroll it properly, and the hieratic script covers every available centimetre of the reed paper. This is the Book of the Dead, commissioned by a woman named Hanutmehit. Not the same one from earlier, the name was common, and it contains 192 separate spells, prayers, and incantations designed to guide her safely through the afterlife's innumerable dangers. 192. The scribe who created this masterpiece worked for 3 years on commission, at a cost that equalled roughly 1/3 of Hanutmehit's entire estate. She ordered it when she was 42, healthy and vibrant, because she wanted the words to be perfect, the illustrations flawless, the magic potent. Her husband's Book of the Dead is 11 spells long. 11. It's a greatest hits compilation, the absolute minimum to maybe possibly get through the Hall of Judgment without being devoured by Amit. He purchased it pre-made from a mortuary temple 3 weeks before his death, and the scribe didn't even have time to properly personalise it. There are blanks where his name should appear, filled in later by a different hand in shakier script. Welcome to the textual divide, where women's anxiety about the afterlife transformed into elaborate written insurance policies, while men grabbed the spiritual equivalent of a pamphlet and called it sufficient. The numbers are stark. In a comprehensive study of 234 books of the dead from the New Kingdom period, women's versions averaged 147 spells. Men's versions averaged 42. Women commissioned longer texts, paid for better illustrations, insisted on higher quality papyrus, and often ordered multiple copies. A primary edition for the tomb and backup scrolls placed in different locations just in case. Men bought what was available and assumed the gods would understand they'd been busy. You're reading now through Hanut Mahit's elaborate scroll, and the spells reveal such specific anxieties. Spell 53, for not eating feces in the realm of the dead. Spell 54, for not eating feces again, just to be absolutely sure. She's covered the same concern twice with different incantations, hedging her bets. Spell 89, for causing the soul to be united with its body in the realm of the dead. Spell 91, alternative method for the same should the first prove insufficient. This woman left nothing to chance. Every potential disaster has a spell, and several have backup spells, and some have backup spells with enhanced wording and additional divine appeals. Her husband's short version contains spell 125, the judgment scene, because you really can't skip that one, and a handful of transformation spells in case he needs to turn into a falcon or something. The rest? A. How complicated can the afterlife be? The commissioning process itself reveals the gender divide. Mortuary workshop records from the Theban necropolis show that women typically engaged with scribes over months or years, making revisions, requesting additional spells, asking for specific illustrations to be refined. One papyrus draft shows 16 rounds of corrections requested by a woman named Tentapet, who kept sending the scroll back with notes like, "The crocodile in spell 31 doesn't look menacing enough, and please make the gods' faces more kind in the judgment scene." Men's commissioning records, when they existed, all read like, "Standard package, medium quality papyrus. When can I pick it up?" One particularly efficient male customer wrote to a scribe, "Whatever you have pre-made is fine. Just insert my name. I trust your judgment. Also, I might be dead when you finish this, so deliver to my son." Historians still argue whether women's textual thoroughness reflects greater literacy, more religious devotion, or simply the kind of catastrophic thinking that makes you prepare for every possible contingency, but you're leaning toward that last one. These women were planning for a bureaucratic nightmare afterlife full of tests, challenges, demons, and the very real possibility of spiritual annihilation. They weren't taking chances. The spells themselves are fascinatingly specific. You're reading one now that's only found in women's books of the dead. Spell for maintaining one's name and identity in the afterlife, lest one be forgotten and cease to exist. The existential dread in that spell is profound. The fear not just of dying, but of being erased, forgotten, becoming nothing. Women included this spell at rates 83 times higher than men. Were women more afraid of being forgotten? Or were they simply more honest about that fear? Another women-heavy spell for remembering the names of one's children in the afterlife. Because apparently there was concern that death might erase memories of your own babies, and that was unacceptable. Women packed memory preservation spells like modern people back up their computers, frequently, thoroughly, with redundant systems. Men's books of the dead focus heavily on power spells, transformations into mighty animals, commands over lesser beings, demonstrations of strength and authority. Women's books contain these too, but they also include protection spells, preservation spells, recognition spells, connection spells. The women were preparing for an afterlife that was social, relational, continuous with their earthly identities. The men were preparing for an afterlife where they'd need to boss around some demons and maybe turn into a hawk occasionally. You're examining now a particularly beautiful book of the dead belonging to a woman named Anhai, a priestess of Amun. Her scroll is over 20 meters long. That's 65 feet of continuous magical protection. The illustrations are museum-quality artwork, each vignette a masterpiece of New Kingdom painting. The text is calligraphic perfection. There isn't a single error, correction, or smudge. This scroll took approximately 5 years to complete and cost more than Anhai's house. She commissioned it at age 38 and reviewed it regularly until her death at 59, making small additions and refinements. By the end, it was less a document and more a spiritual fortress constructed from words and images. Her brother's Book of the Dead is 6 spells on medium-grade papyrus, with illustrations that look like they were drawn during the scribe's lunch break. He probably paid for it with petty cash. The personalization is key. Women insisted on customization, their actual names in every spell, their specific circumstances referenced, sometimes even their individual fears addressed in unique incantations. One woman's Book of the Dead contains a spell found nowhere else. For protecting one's garden in the afterlife, that the flowers planted with love in life may bloom eternally. She was a gardener. She wanted her garden in eternity, so she paid a scribe to write a custom spell ensuring she'd have one. Men's Books of the Dead are often fill-in-the-blank affairs. Insert name here with their actual name barely squeezing into the allotted space, because the scribe's handwriting was larger than expected. Do you remember Neonacta, the food-obsessed planner? Her Book of the Dead is equally thorough. 168 spells, including several about ensuring proper offerings reach the deceased and don't get stolen by other spirits. She was worried someone might eat her carefully prepared afterlife food, so she got spells to protect it. This level of comprehensiveness is either admirable or exhausting, and you're not sure which. The backup copies are particularly interesting. Wealthy women sometimes commission 2 or 3 versions of their Books of the Dead, placing them in different locations within the tomb, by the head, near the feet, in the antechamber. The logic was apparently, if one scroll gets damaged or destroyed or somehow fails, there are backups. It's spiritual redundancy, the ancient equivalent of cloud storage for your soul. Men with backup scrolls? You found exactly 3 examples in the entire archaeological record, and 2 of those were probably gift from worried daughters. You're sitting in the darkness now, thinking about all these words, these hundreds of thousands of carefully inked hieroglyphs, all designed to speak on behalf of the dead. The women understood something profound. In the afterlife, you'd need an advocate, a script, a prepared statement. You couldn't improvise your way through eternity. You needed the right words at the right time, and those words had to be ready before you died, because afterward would be too late. The men assumed they'd wing it, and maybe that confidence was justified. Maybe the gods respected a good improvisation. Or maybe the afterlife is full of men who wish they'd paid for the extended spell package. You're standing in a tomb chamber that feels crowded despite having been empty of living people for millennia. The walls are covered with painted figures, servants, attendants, workers, dozens of them, and scattered across the floor are shabty figures, small mummiform statues carved from wood, stone and faience. You start counting, 20, 50, 100. You give up at 237 because there are still more in boxes you haven't opened yet. This tomb belongs to a woman named Mutnodjmet, a wealthy landowner's wife, and she has assembled an entire workforce for the afterlife. Bakers, brewers, field workers, administrators, even a woman whose title translates roughly to Keeper of Comfortable Silence. Mutnodjmet spent 18 years selecting, commissioning and organising this servant staff. Each shabti is labelled with a name, job description and schedule. She's created an afterlife HR department complete with organisational charts. Some shabtis wear different clothing to indicate rank. Some hold tools specific to their tasks. A few have tiny tech scrolls tucked into their bases with detailed job descriptions. She's thought of everything. Her husband's tomb contains 12 shabti figures. They're identical, generic, probably purchased as a set from a mortuary workshop's clearance section. Not one has a personal name or specific job assignment. They're just there. 12 ambiguous helpers for whatever needs doing in eternity. The servant question reveals perhaps the most pragmatic aspect of gendered preparation differences. Women understood that the afterlife, according to Egyptian theology, involved actual work, fields to plough, grain to grind, bread to bake. The Assyrian afterlife wasn't eternal rest. It was eternal agricultural labour, unless you had servants to do it for you. Women took this seriously. Men assumed they'd figure something out. You're reading now from the Papyrus of Ani again, this time the sections dealing with Shabti activation. The spells are remarkably specific. O Shabti, if I am called upon to do any work in the realm of the dead, to cultivate the fields, to irrigate the land, to carry sand from east to west, you shall say, "Here I am, I will do it." It's a magical employment contract binding these figures to eternal service. Women commissioned these spells to be inscribed on every single Shabti. Men often had the spell once on a single master figure and hoped it would cover the whole workforce. The numbers scale with wealth, but the gender gap remains consistent. A wealthy woman might have 400 Shabtis, a wealthy man might have 80, a poor woman might have 3 carefully carved wooden figures she made herself over years. A poor man might have 1 roughly shaped clay figure his son threw in the tomb at the last minute. Across all social classes, women brought more help to the afterlife. Historians still argue whether this reflects women's greater awareness of domestic labour demands. They knew exactly how much work running a household required, or simply more thorough planning generally. You suspect it's both. These women had spent their lives managing servants, organising work, delegating tasks. They understood that eternity wouldn't manage itself. The quality difference is striking. You're examining Mutnod Jumet's Shabtis under museum lighting, and each one is an individual artwork. Different facial features, different body types, realistic tool-holding poses. She didn't want a generic servant army. She wanted specific, competent individuals. One Shabti is carved as an older woman with laugh lines around her eyes, perhaps modelled on a beloved servant from life. Another is a young man with muscular arms, clearly designated for heavy labour. These aren't mass-produced magical objects, they're portraits. Her husband's 12 Shabtis could be siblings. Same blank face, same generic pose, probably carved by the same workshop apprentice on a slow Tuesday. They'll do the work if magically activated, but they won't bring any personality to it. The organisation systems are where women's preparation really shines. Some women organise Shabtis by task. Farming figures in one basket, food preparation figures in another, cleaning figures in a third. Others organised by shift. First-month workers separate from second-month workers, ensuring eternal labour rotation. One woman's tomb contained a papyrus roster listing every Shabti by name, job and schedule, a 3,000-year-old work calendar. Men's Shabti organisation strategy. Put them in the tomb. Maybe in a box if someone felt ambitious. You're looking now at something that makes you smile despite the sepulchral setting. A woman named Izet commissioned 49 Shabti figures, 7 for each day of the week according to her organisational logic. But she also commissioned 7 overseer Shabtis, distinguished by their fancier clothing and stern expressions. These overseers hold no tools, they hold sticks. Their job is to supervise the other Shabtis, to ensure they're actually working and not slacking off in the afterlife. Izet was so thorough in her planning that she brought middle management to eternity. Her husband brought 12 workers and apparently trusted they'd self-manage. The personal touches reveal different attitudes towards servants and service. Women's Shabtis sometimes include figures clearly modelled on real people, trusted servants from life, beloved attendants who died years earlier. There are inscriptions like, "In the likeness of Henut Mehit, my faithful servant who departed in year 5 of Thutmose III, that she may serve me again beyond death." These women were recreating their earthly households, bringing back people they'd relied on and cared for. Men rarely personalised their servant figures beyond generic labels. The Shabtis are workers, not individuals, tools, not companions. Do you remember the woman who prepared linen for family members? Her Shabti collection includes 23 figures specifically designated as servants for my children in the afterlife. She wasn't just preparing her own eternity, she was staffing her children's afterlives. ensuring that even the dead babies would have help if they needed it. The maternal preparation instinct extended beyond death, beyond even the boundaries of her own needs. Men's Shabti collections rarely include servants designated for anyone but themselves. The inscriptions on Shabtis tell stories of anxiety and hope. One woman's figures all bear an additional spell. May you recognize me as your mistress in the afterlife and serve willingly, not with resentment. She was worried her eternal servants might not like her, might sabotage their work, might rebel in the afterlife. So she added a happiness spell, trying to ensure cheerful service for eternity. The psychological complexity there is remarkable. Even in death, she was concerned about staff morale. Men's Shabti inscriptions, when they exist beyond the standard activation spell, tend toward commands, do the work assigned. No please, no happiness clauses, just orders. You're holding now a tiny Shabti, no bigger than your thumb, carved from cheap limestone. It's crude, rough, clearly made by unskilled hands. The inscription reads, Shabti for Nefret, made by Nefret, that I may have help in the afterlife even though I am poor. This woman couldn't afford to commission proper Shabtis, so she carved her own. One figure, imperfect, but present. She prepared within her means, refusing to go into eternity without any help at all. The poorest men's tombs often contain no Shabtis whatsoever. They do their own eternal labour, apparently, or hope the gods would be understanding. The workshops that produced Shabtis were major industries, and women were their primary customers. Purchase records from the House of Life in Memphis show that women bought Shabtis at a rate roughly 5 times higher than men, spent more per figure, and returned more often to add to their collections. Shabti acquisition was an ongoing process for women. They'd buy a few each year, gradually building their workforce over decades. Men bought in bulk once, usually late, usually cheap. One workshop complaint letter has survived, written by a frustrated craftsman to his brother. I have 3 orders from women, each demanding 20 figures with individual features and specific tools. I have 1 order from a man demanding 100 identical figures by next week. The man will pay more for less work, but the women will tell their friends if I do well. I am torn. You're drifting now in the darkness, thinking about Mutnojmet walking through her house at age 45, looking at her living servants and mentally noting which tasks she'd need replicated in the afterlife. Imagining her commissioning meetings with Shabti carvers, describing exactly what she needed. This one should be good at bread, patient with tedious grinding work. That one needs strong arms for hauling water. This one should have a kind face. I'll see her every day for eternity. She should be pleasant to look at. Meanwhile, her husband probably thought, 12 should cover it. How much work can the afterlife be? The tombs hold the answer. Women prepared for eternity like it was a real place with real needs. Men prepared like it was a vacation where someone else would handle the details. And when the afterlife turned out to require actual labour, if the myths were true, you can guess which approach paid off. You're kneeling beside a collection of small objects that gleam even in the dim museum lighting, and each piece feels heavier than its physical weight suggests. Amulets, hundreds of them. Carnelian hearts to protect against testimony in the judgment hall. Lapis lazuli scarabs to ensure resurrection. Gold-deeged pillars symbolizing stability. Turquoise wadjet eyes against evil. Obsidian headrests for comfortable eternal sleep. They're strung on ancient thread wrapped in linen packets, tucked into tiny faience boxes, each one a prayer made solid, a fear transformed into protective stone. This collection belonged to a woman named Taweret. Yes, named after the hippopotamus goddess of childbirth. And the inventory scroll lists 347 separate amulets acquired over a 36-year period. 347 small insurance policies against every possible afterlife catastrophe. She began collecting at age 17 after her mother's death and never stopped. The earliest amulets are simple, inexpensive clay. The later ones are precious stones set in gold, reflecting her growing wealth and escalating anxiety about eternity. Her husband's amulet collection, one heart scarab, standard issue, functional, probably purchased the same day as his Shabti figures from the same bulk discount vendor. Welcome to the jewelry divide, where women's preparation transformed into wearable magic and men basically showed up to eternity, wearing the ancient equivalent of a medical alert bracelet and nothing else. The numbers are overwhelming. In a study of 412 New Kingdom burials, women's bodies average 63 amulets each. Men average 7. Women wore protective jewelry like armor, layered amulets like shields, covered themselves in stones whose magical properties had been calculated and recalculated. Men wore the bare minimum required by religious law and called it sufficient. You're reading now from a jeweler's sales record, and the gender patterns leap off the papyrus. Women's purchases, year 4, 3rd month. Lady Hennett-Meyer purchased 6 Wadjet eye amulets in varying sizes, 1 gold heart scarab with personal inscription, 3 carnelian ankhs, and commissioned a custom protective collar with 42 separate elements. Men's purchases, year 4, 4th month. Scribe Amen Mose purchased 1 heart scarab, declined gift wrapping. The specificity of women's amulet collections reveals deep knowledge of magical theory. Taure didn't just grab pretty stones, she studied. Her collection includes protection against specific demons mentioned in the Book of the Dead, amulets timed to her birth constellation, stones matched to her personal names, both her given name and her beautiful name used in religious contexts. She consulted priests, read magical papyri, interviewed other women about their amulet choices. This wasn't shopping, it was research. Her husband wore his scarab and assumed the gods would appreciate his minimalist aesthetic. Historians still argue whether women's elaborate amulet collections reflect greater superstition, more practical fear, or simply better understanding of how the magical protection system supposedly worked. But you're examining the evidence and seeing something else. Women were hedging every bet because the consequences of failure were too terrible to contemplate. The amulet types themselves differ by gender. Women's collections emphasize protection, preservation, recognition, and connection. Amulets to protect their names, preserve their bodies, help them be recognized by family, maintain relationships beyond death. Men's collections, when they exist, emphasize power and transformation. Amulets to command demons, transform into powerful animals, demonstrate strength before the gods. You're holding now a particularly moving amulet, a small golden heart inscribed with a woman's prayer. O my heart, do not stand as a witness against me. Do not speak against me in the judgment. Do not oppose me in the tribunal. It's spell 30b from the Book of the Dead, condensed onto a piece of jewelry smaller than your thumbnail. The woman who wore this carried her terror of self-betrayal as a pendant. She feared her own heart might testify to her imperfections, so she paid a master goldsmith to bind it to silence with words of power. Men had this same fear, theoretically, but their heart scarabs tend to be larger, simpler, more perfunctory. 1 scarab, 1 spell. Done. Women often wore multiple heart protections, backup hearts in case the primary one failed, secondary spells inscribed on different stones, redundant magical systems protecting the same organ from the same potential testimony. The protective collar necklaces are works of art and paranoia combined. You're examining one now, 48 separate amulets strung together in a specific sequence determined by magical correspondence tables. Each stone was chosen for its protective properties, its colour symbolism, its resonance with specific gods. The arrangement isn't random, it's a magical algorithm written in gemstones. The woman who commissioned this piece, a merchant's wife named Mutemwaya, met with the jeweller 17 times over 2 years to get the design exactly right. The jeweller's notes survive. Client is very particular. Client wishes to know the source quarry of each stone. Client has rejected 3 lapis pieces for insufficient colour depth. Client insists on personal blessing from temple priest before final assembly. Her husband's jewellery, one bronze ring with his name on it. Not magical, just identifying, in case someone found his body and wondered whose it was. The children's amulets are heartbreaking. Women who lost children often commissioned small amulets inscribed with the child's name and protective spells, worn by the mother for the rest of her life and then placed in her tomb. These weren't for the living. They were connection points for the afterlife, ways of finding your baby again in eternity. One woman's tomb contains 11 tiny amulets, each bearing a child's name. Infant mortality was catastrophic, and she'd lost 11 babies. She wore their names against her skin and carried them to her grave, refusing to be separated even by death. Men's tombs rarely contain amulets for deceased children. The grief was presumably there, but the magical preparation wasn't. Do you remember Iset, the woman with the overseer Shaptis? Her amulet collection is equally thorough. 293 pieces, including a complete set of protective amulets for every body part. She has a DD-Jed pillar for her spine, a Wadgetai for each eye, anchor amulets for her hands and feet, scarabs for organs, and a golden headrest amulet to protect her literal head. She's covered every vulnerability, protected every potential point of failure. If the afterlife has ways to hurt you, Izette has purchased insurance. Her husband has one heart scarab and what appears to be a decorative bracelet that might not even be magical. He's either supremely confident or supremely unconcerned. You're betting on the latter. The commissioning process for custom amulets was elaborate. Women would consult with priests about their specific fears and vulnerabilities, then work with jewelers to create talismans addressing those concerns. One commission contract survives in detail. For Lady Nefret, one protective collar containing prayers against the 7 arrows of Sekhmet, binding spells to prevent heart testimony, invocations of Isis for protection, and symbols of the 4 sons of Horus. Timeline, 8 months. Cost, 2 deben of gold plus materials. Client to provide 3 personal hairs to be incorporated into the binding. Men's amulet commissions, when documented, read like, 1 heart scarab, standard inscription. Cheap materials acceptable, rush order. The layering strategy is fascinating. Women didn't just wear amulets, they wore them in specific combinations designed to create overlapping magical protections. A Wadjet Eye amulet might be paired with an Ankh for life, a D-Jed for stability, and a Tiet for protection, creating a 4-part defensive system against a specific type of harm. It's magical engineering, treating protection as a technical problem requiring multiple redundant solutions. Men wore one thing and hoped it was broadly effective. You're reading now from a magical papyrus that discusses amulet effectiveness, and there's a section clearly written for women. The protection of 1 amulet may fail, the protection of 3 amulets working in concert is stronger. The protection of 7 amulets properly aligned and consecrated is nearly absolute. Women took this teaching seriously. Men apparently didn't read that far. The personal inscriptions reveal different relationships with mortality. Women's amulets often include personal pleas. Protect Hanutmahit, born in year 3 of Amenhotep II, daughter of Neferure, beloved of her children. They're individualized, emotional, specific. Men's amulets are functional, protect the bearer. No names, no personal details, generic magical activation phrases. One particularly elaborate amulet set belonged to a woman named Chuyu. Yes, that Chuyu, the king's mother-in-law with the perfect honey. Her protective jewellery is now in museums around the world, and the collection is staggering. Gold, lapis lazuli, carnelian, turquoise, obsidian, every stone known to have protective properties. Some amulets are inscribed with entire chapters of the Book of the Dead. Some contain miniature scrolls tucked into hollow chambers. She wore a library of protection, a jewellery archive of every spell that might save her. Her husband's amulets could fit in your pocket. You're lying there now, thinking about these women covering themselves in stones and prayers, weighing themselves down with protection, carrying the physical burden of their fears made manifest in jewellery. Every amulet added weight. Every spell-inscribed stone was something to carry, and they carried it anyway, for years, adding piece after piece, building their armor against eternity one gemstone at a time. The men travelled light, apparently confident the minimal protection would suffice. And maybe they were right. Or maybe the afterlife is full of underprotected souls who wish they'd listened to their wives and bought the extended amulet package. You're standing at the entrance to a tomb that makes you feel slightly claustrophobic just looking at the floor plan. This burial chamber has 3 separate rooms connected by narrow passages, 2 false doors painted to look like escape routes, a concealed shaft leading to a secondary chamber, ventilation holes that serve no practical purpose for the dead but create the illusion of breathable space, and a complicated series of corridors that loop back on themselves in ways that suggest the occupant was deeply concerned about getting trapped. This is Lady Nefertari's tomb, not the famous queen, a different Nefertari, a judge's wife who spent 12 years designing her eternal resting place. She consulted with architects, modified plans 17 times, and personally supervised construction with one clear obsession: options. She wanted multiple rooms in case one flooded or collapsed. She wanted alternative exits in case the main entrance became blocked. She wanted escape routes, even though technically she'd be dead and wouldn't need to escape anything. The architecture itself is a manifestation of anxiety, stone and space, arranged to soothe fears about eternal entrapment. Her husband's tomb, located 50 meters away, is a rectangular box carved into bedrock. 1 room, 1 entrance, 4 walls and a ceiling. He apparently never worried about being trapped for eternity, or if he did, he didn't express that concern through architectural modifications. Welcome to the spatial divide, where women designed elaborate tomb structures with multiple contingencies, and men essentially dug holes and called them sufficient. The architectural evidence is consistent across centuries and social classes. Women's tombs, when the deceased had any control over design, tend toward complexity. Multiple chambers, interconnected spaces, careful attention to layout and flow. Men's tombs favour simplicity. Dig deep enough that grave robbers will be discouraged. Make the space big enough for your stuff. Done. You're examining now the tomb plans of 53 couples buried in the Theban necropolis, and the pattern is unmistakable. Women's burial chambers average 2.3 rooms. Men's average 1.1, and that 0.1 represents the occasional addition of a small antechamber, probably added by a thoughtful son. Women designed for occupancy, as if they'd be living in these spaces. Men designed for storage, as if their tombs were just really permanent closets. Historians still argue whether this reflects women's greater anxiety about the afterlife environment, their more sophisticated understanding of space and dwelling, or simply having more time to obsess over architectural details during the tomb planning process. You suspect it's anxiety mixed with a practical understanding that if you're going to spend eternity somewhere, it should at least be well designed. The false doors are particularly telling. These painted or carved elements look like functional exits but lead nowhere. They're symbolic passages for the car to travel in and out. Women's tombs contain false doors at a rate 3 times higher than men's tombs. The placement is careful, deliberate. False doors positioned to create visual flow, to suggest movement and possibility, to prevent the space from feeling like a dead end, which, ironically, it absolutely is. Men's tombs rarely include false doors beyond the single traditional one required by religious custom. One exit symbol, actual or symbolic, was apparently sufficient for male psychological comfort. You're looking at a remarkable architectural diagram now, drawn on papyrus by a woman named Toweret, who designed her own tomb. She's included annotations in her own hand. This chamber for sleeping should the eternal rest require actual rest. This chamber for receiving offerings, so visitors need not disturb the inner sanctum. This corridor angled to catch morning light, if light somehow penetrates. This alcove for private contemplation, Should consciousness continue in some form? She's designing for uncertainty, creating spaces for every possible version of how the afterlife might actually function. Her husband's tomb plan, drawn by a professional architect, includes no annotations. It's a rectangle with a sarcophagus marked in the centre. That's the whole design concept. The ventilation considerations are fascinating because they make no practical sense. Dead people don't breathe. Yet women's tombs frequently include carved channels, decorative grills, and openings designed to suggest airflow and prevent the space from feeling suffocating. It's psychological architecture, designing for the comfort of a consciousness that may or may not persist. One woman's tomb includes 16 separate ventilation features, none of which actually ventilate anything. They're decorative, symbolic, manifestations of the fear of being buried alive or the fear of airless eternity. Men's tombs, sealed boxes. If air gets in, that's a construction flaw, not a feature. The escape route obsession appears primarily in women's tombs. These aren't actual functional exits, they're architectural elements designed to create the feeling that escape is possible. Passages that lead to small alcoves painted with outdoor scenes as if you could step through into open air. Carved staircases ascending to solid rock, suggesting a way up and out even though there isn't one. Corridors that turn corners to create the illusion of depth and possibility beyond what the actual tomb structure contains. Do you remember Mutnojmet with her elaborate servant collection? Her tomb architecture is equally complex. 7 interconnected chambers, each with a specific purpose she documented in the tomb's dedicatory inscription. Chamber for my body, chamber for my possessions, chamber for my servants, chamber for receiving visitors, chamber for private offerings, chamber for rest, and chamber for eternity. Should eternity require its own space separate from daily death? She's planned for the possibility that the afterlife has different modes, different activities, different needs depending on the eternal day. Her husband's tomb has one room divided by a low wall. That's his entire architectural innovation. A wall that doesn't reach the ceiling, creating the suggestion of 2 spaces without actually committing to building a second chamber. The decoration patterns reflect these spatial anxieties. Women's tomb walls are painted with landscapes, gardens, open skies, visual suggestions that the space extends beyond its physical boundaries. There are windows painted on solid rock, showing views of the Nile, palm groves, distant mountains. The woman buried here wanted to feel surrounded by the world, not trapped in a stone box. Men's tomb walls feature religious scenes, gods, hieroglyphic texts, important and proper, but not designed to create the illusion of space or openness. They decorated for religious correctness, not environmental comfort. The family tomb situation reveals interesting dynamics. When couples shared burial spaces, women often insisted on architectural modifications to the family tomb structure. Records from the Deir el Medina workers' village show repeated instances of women requesting additional chambers, expanded corridors, extra rooms added to existing family tombs. "My wife wishes another chamber," one man wrote in a letter to his brother. "She says 2 generations in one room is insufficient. She's drawn plans, she's obtained estimates. She will not rest until this is done, and neither therefore will I." Men joining family tombs typically accepted whatever space was available. "Put me with father" was the extent of their architectural input. The construction supervision patterns are stark. Tomb building records show that women visited construction sites an average of 3 times per week during active building phases. They inspected work, requested modifications, argued with builders about wall thicknesses and ceiling heights. One woman's correspondence with her tomb architect survives in fragments, and it's glorious. "The ceiling in the secondary chamber is too low. I will not spend eternity stooping. Raise it by 2 cubits. The passage curves too sharply. Widen it. The alcove you added faces north. I specified east for mourning symbolism. Correct this error." Men's construction supervision, when documented, averages 1 visit per month. Looking good, keep going appears to have been the standard male oversight strategy. You're examining now a tomb that was modified 3 separate times during its owner's life. The woman kept changing her mind, adding features, expanding the design. The construction records span 18 years. She started planning at age 37 and was still making modifications at 55. Each phase reflects evolving concerns, initially simple, then more complex, then finally incorporating elements she'd seen in other tombs that she decided she also needed. Its architectural anxiety manifesting as continuous revision. Her husband's tomb was designed once, built to specification, and never modified. He made a decision and stuck with it, which sounds admirably decisive until you realize his decision was rectangular box, medium size, whatever you think is fine. The symbolic geography within women's tombs is more elaborate. They position different elements according to magical directions and religious symbolism, offering tables to the east, sleeping alcoves to the west, protective amulets buried at the 4 corners, false doors aligned with stellar positions. They treated their tombs like sacred landscapes that needed proper orientation and arrangement. Men treated their tombs like storage units with religious decorations. You're drifting now, imagining Nefertari walking through her unfinished tomb at age 46, running her hands along walls that will eventually entomb her, mentally arranging and rearranging the space, trying to make it feel less like a trap and more like an eternal home. She's planning escape routes she'll never use, designing rooms for purposes that may never exist, creating architectural complexity to soothe existential terror. Meanwhile, her husband approved a simple rectangular floor plan and went back to his actual life, secure in the assumption that dead people don't care about architecture. And maybe he was right, but the tombs reveal which approach felt safer to those facing eternity. The women built elaborate spaces with options, possibilities, and the illusion of freedom. The men built boxes and hoped death wouldn't feel claustrophobic. You're holding something that makes your throat tight, a tiny mummy no longer than your forearm, wrapped in linen so fine it must have been someone's precious fabric, someone's saved treasure. The hieratic inscription on the wooden coffin reads, Neferue, daughter of Hanut-Maya, who lived 3 months and 7 days, beloved of her mother, prepared for eternity. This isn't the mother's tomb. This is a separate, complete burial for an infant who barely had time to open her eyes to the sun. The provisions are miniature but complete. Tiny shabtis carved from cheap wood, a small collection of amulets, jars of food scaled to infant proportions, even a tiny Book of the Dead with simplified spells. Hanut-Maya prepared this. She commissioned the coffin, gathered the provisions, performed the rituals, and buried her daughter with the same care she was preparing for her own eventual death. The cost represented roughly 6 months of the family's income, a catastrophic expense for a 3-month life. But Hanut-Maya did it anyway, because her baby needed protection in the afterlife. And mothers don't stop mothering just because their children die. In the adjacent area, you find the tomb of Hanut-Maya's husband. There's no mention of the dead daughter, no provisions, no amulets, no tiny coffin. Men grieved. Of course they grieved. But they rarely transformed that grief into elaborate afterlife preparation for lost children. Welcome to the most heartbreaking aspect of gendered preparation differences. Women prepared for their children's deaths with the same thoroughness they prepared for their own, while men participated in these rituals rarely, peripherally, as observers of grief rather than architects of it. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming and emotionally devastating. Infant and child burials with extensive grave goods are almost universally associated with maternal preparation. Chemical analysis of textile wrappings, handwriting on labels, stylistic choices in amulet selection, all point to female hands doing the work of preparing small bodies for eternity. You're reading now from a letter written by a woman named Takat to her sister. My son died in his 4th year. The fever took him quickly. I had not prepared. I had thought, hoped, prayed. that I would not need to prepare for him, but now I must, and I have nothing ready. I am gathering what I can, I am commissioning what I must. My husband says to give the child a simple burial, that elaborate preparations are for adults. But how can I send my baby into the next world with less protection than I plan for myself? So I prepare, though it empties our savings. I prepare, though my hands shake wrapping his small limbs. I prepare because what else can a mother do? Men's responses to child death, when documented, tend toward philosophical acceptance or religious platitudes. The gods have taken him. She is with the blessed ones now. True, perhaps comforting, certainly easier than spending months gathering miniature funerary equipment for a person who barely existed. Historians still argue whether women's elaborate child burial preparations reflect deeper maternal bonds, different grief processing, or simply the practical extension of their general preparation tendencies. But you're looking at tomb after tomb after tomb, and the pattern is unambiguous. Mothers prepared their children for eternity. Fathers wrote their names on tomb walls and moved forward with their lives. The miniaturization of adult burial practices for children is remarkably complete. You're examining now a child's tomb. The deceased was about 7 years old, and it contains everything an adult tomb would have, just smaller. 43 shabtis, each carved to child proportions, a Book of the Dead with age-appropriate spell modifications, cosmetic equipment sized for small hands, food offerings in tiny jars. Someone, almost certainly the mother, spent years gathering and creating these miniature provisions, probably starting the moment the child was born, adding to the collection with each birthday, hoping never to need it but preparing anyway. The father's contribution, according to the tomb's accounting records, was paying for the burial plot and hiring the mortuary workers. Financial support, but not the emotional labour of actual preparation. Do you remember Naunachter, the comprehensive food preparer? Her tomb also contains 3 small subsidiary burials for children who died young, ages 2, 5, and 8. Each child has complete provisions scaled to their age. The 2-year-old has nursing-related amulets and maternal protection spells. The 5-year-old has toys and learning tablets. The 8-year-old has the beginnings of an adult burial kit. Naunachter prepared for each child's specific stage of development, ensuring they'd have what they needed for their particular version of childhood in the afterlife. Her husband's tomb mentions the dead children in painted inscriptions, but provides nothing material for their afterlife needs. The mother-child paired burials are particularly moving. These are tombs designed from the beginning to hold both mother and child, with the child's burial already incorporated into the mother's afterlife plans. One woman's tomb includes a small chamber specifically designed for her daughter who died at age 11 with this inscription: "I have prepared a place for you beside me, that we may not be separated in eternity. What death has divided, the afterlife will reunite." You rarely find father-child paired burials with this level of intentional, prepared togetherness. Men are buried with children, certainly, but the preparation, the planning, the emotional architecture of eternal companionship, that's maternal work. The amulet selections for dead children reveal careful magical thinking. Women chose protective amulets, addressing age-specific vulnerabilities, nursing amulets for infants who died before weaning, growth amulets for children who died before maturity, fertility amulets for adolescents who died before marriage. They were trying to protect their children against afterlife dangers appropriate to their stage of development, extending maternal protection beyond the boundaries of life. Men's provision of amulets for dead children when it occurs tends toward generic protection, standard religious symbols without age-appropriate customization. The emotional weight of this preparation is crushing when you really think about it. Imagine being a mother in ancient Egypt losing a child, which happened with horrifying frequency. Infant mortality rates approached 50%, and then spending the next months or years assembling a complete afterlife kit for that tiny person, wrapping the small body yourself because no one else will be careful enough. commissioning shabtis that will never be activated because your child is too young to owe labour in the fields of the afterlife, selecting amulets to protect a spirit you're not even sure exists yet, because what if it does and you didn't prepare? Men experienced the same losses but rarely responded with the same preparation. Archaeological records from Deir el-Medina show that child burials funded and prepared by fathers alone are significantly simpler. Basic wrapping, minimal grave goods, few personalised elements. Child burials prepared by mothers are elaborate, expensive, heartbreaking in their completeness. You're reading now from a papyrus that lists the contents of a child's tomb, and the handwriting changes partway through. The first section is neat, organised, clearly written by a professional scribe. Inventory of burial equipment for the child Neferhotep, son of Amenemope and Mutemwiya. Then the handwriting shifts, becomes shakier, more emotional. Added by his mother, his favourite toy boat that he may sail in the afterlife, his dog's collar that he may find his pet beyond death, the lock of my hair that he may recognise me when we meet again. The mother added to the official inventory, couldn't bear to let her child go with only the standard equipment needed to include pieces of life, of connection, of hope for reunion. You find no equivalent paternal additions in the archaeological record. Men followed the official inventory, women added love. The ongoing provision for dead children is another maternal pattern. Women who lost children often made regular offering trips to the child's tomb throughout their remaining lives, bringing food, toys, small gifts. Tomb paintings sometimes show these visiting scenes, a woman kneeling before a small offering table, clearly at a child's burial site, maintaining the relationship across the boundary of death. Men visited family tombs for festivals and formal occasions, but the regular personal maintaining the relationship visits were maternal work. The economic burden of child burial preparation was substantial. A complete child burial could cost anywhere from 1 to 6 months of household income, depending on social class and the elaborateness of provisions. Women often saved secretly, hiding money and materials designated for potential child burials, hoping never to use them but unable to risk being unprepared. Men typically only engaged with the economics of child burial after a death occurred, at which point cost became emergencies rather than planned expenses. You're sitting in the darkness now, surrounded by the archaeological evidence of mothers who couldn't save their children from death, but could at least prepare them for whatever came after. Every tiny mummy, every miniature shabti, every child-sized amulet represents a mother's love transformed into material form, a grief so profound it demanded action, preparation, the only control available when everything else had been lost. The fathers grieved too, you don't doubt that. But the grief stayed interior, philosophical, expressed in words and time rather than miniature coffins and carefully wrapped bodies. The mother's grief built tombs, assembled provisions, prepared the way for children to walk into eternity, not alone but equipped, protected, loved even beyond the boundaries of life itself. And that preparation, that maternal refusal to let death be the end of care, that's not about the afterlife being real or fake. That's about love being stronger than uncertainty, about doing something, anything, when there's nothing else left to do. You're examining 2 adjacent tombs in the Theban necropolis, and the architectural relationship between them is so deliberate it makes your chest ache. These aren't married couples, these are sisters, Nefertari and Hanut-Mehit, buried side by side with a connecting passage carved between their chambers. The passage is narrow, symbolic rather than functional, but it's there, a permanent connection between their eternal resting places. The tomb inscriptions make the intention explicit. Nefertari and Hanut-Mehit, sisters in life, companions in death, that they may speak to each other in the night of eternity and not be lonely. They planned this together. They purchased adjacent plots, hired the same architect, coordinated their tomb design so the chambers would align properly for the connecting passage. They spent the last 15 years of their lives preparing not just for their individual afterlives, but for their shared eternal companionship. Neither sister married, or if they did, those relationships aren't mentioned in their tomb biographies. What matters, what they immortalized in stone, is their sisterhood. You search the necropolis for equivalent male companionship burials, paired brothers planning eternal adjacency, friends arranging to be buried side by side with connecting passages. The examples are rare to non-existent. Men are buried near each other by family arrangement or cemetery logistics, but deliberate, planned, prepared, eternal companionship. That's predominantly female work. Welcome to the social network divide, where women designed afterlives with relationships built in, and men apparently assumed they'd be fine spending eternity alone. The paired burial phenomenon is overwhelmingly female. In a comprehensive survey of Theban private tombs, researchers identified 63 deliberately paired non-spousal burials. 58 were women, sisters, mothers and daughters, close friends, even former servants, and their mistresses choosing to spend eternity together. 5 were men, and 3 of those were brothers buried together by family decision rather than personal planning. Women understood something men either didn't grasp or didn't prioritize. Eternity is a long time to spend alone. You're reading now from the tomb autobiography of a woman named Mutemweya, and it includes this remarkable passage. I have arranged to lie beside my friend Takat, with whom I shared 42 years of life. We ground grain together as children. We bore our children in the same years. We supported each other through illness and loss. Why should death separate what life has joined? I've purchased the plot beside hers. I've arranged the passage. We will not be parted. Historians still argue whether these arrangements reflect female social bonding being stronger than male equivalents, women having more anxiety about isolation in the afterlife, or simply women being more willing to plan for emotional needs beyond death. The evidence, though, is clear. Women built social structures into their eternal resting places. Men built solitary chambers. The mother-daughter paired tombs are particularly common and particularly touching. Women who lost mothers would sometimes purchase plots adjacent to their mother's burial, even if decades had passed since the mother's death. They'd construct connecting elements, passages, shared courtyards, aligned false doors, creating architectural bonds that death couldn't sever. The inscriptions often emphasize continuity. As my mother cared for me in life, I prepare to care for her in eternity. As she guided me, I will be guided by her still. Father-son paired burials exist, but they're typically family tradition rather than emotional choice. I lie in my father's tomb because that's where our family is buried, rather than I need my father's companionship in eternity. The friend burials are the most revealing. Women who formed deep friendships in life often made provisions for continuing those relationships beyond death. You're looking at purchase records from a cemetery administrator, and they show 2 women named Henutmeyer and Nefertiti buying adjacent plots together. Not sequentially, not one buying near where the other happened to be, but together, in one transaction planning their eternal proximity, while both were still healthy and decades from death. Male friendship tomb pairings are rare enough that when they occur, they're notable exceptions rather than patterns. One example exists of 2 soldiers who served together requesting adjacent burials, but that's professional loyalty, not quite the same as the deep personal bonds women immortalized in stone. The servant-mistress paired burials add another layer of complexity. Some women arrange to be buried near beloved servants, sometimes even incorporating the servant's burial into the mistress's tomb structure. These weren't generic servants in the afterlife arrangements. Those are the Shabti figures. These were specific relationships with specific individuals, valued enough that the women wanted those particular people near them forever. One tomb contains this inscription: "Here lies Lady Toweret, and beside her is Set, her servant for 37 years, her companion, her friend." What society divided in life, death unites in equal rest. The servant's burial, while smaller, contains provisions almost as elaborate as the mistress's. Someone, presumably the mistress, prepared Isette's afterlife with nearly the care she prepared her own. Men rarely made similar arrangements. Servants were buried in servant areas, organised by profession or household affiliation, not by personal bonds with their masters. Do you remember Naunachter with her comprehensive food preparation? She also arranged paired burials for all 3 of her daughters who survived to adulthood, purchasing 4 adjacent plots, 1 for herself and 3 for her daughters, with connecting symbolic passages between all 4 chambers. She designed a eternal neighbourhood, ensuring that her family's women would always be together. Her sons are buried in their husbands' family tombs, following patriarchal tradition, but her daughters stay with her across death's boundary. The architectural elements connecting paired tombs are sometimes purely symbolic, carved but not functional passages, and sometimes partially functional, allowing for physical connection between chambers. The most elaborate examples have shared courtyards where offerings could be made to both deceased simultaneously. False doors aligned so the Kays could visit between tombs, even shared chapels where the living could honour both dead together. Male-paired tombs, in the rare instances they exist, tend towards simple adjacency without architectural integration. 2 separate tombs that happen to be near each other, rather than designed as unified eternal companionship structures. The planning process for these paired burials often spanned decades. You're reading correspondence between 2 friends, Hanutmahit and Mutemwia, discussing their joint tomb plans over a 12-year period. They debate plot locations, architectural styles, decoration themes. They visit each other's construction sites and offer suggestions. They coordinate their burial good acquisition so their tombs will complement each other. I have commissioned Shabtis, Hanutmahit writes. You should obtain similar ones so our eternal servants will work well together. This level of collaborative afterlife planning appears exclusively in female relationships in the archaeological record. The emotional language in paired tomb inscriptions is striking, that we may not be alone, that we may speak to each other, that the silence of death may not separate us. Women were explicitly textually anxious about isolation in the afterlife, and they responded by building companionship into their tomb structures. Men's tomb inscriptions, when they mention the afterlife at all, emphasize individual triumph, successful navigation of judgment, personal transformation. The social dimension, the fear of loneliness, the need for companionship. Those concerns are largely absent from male tomb texts. The visiting patterns support the companionship thesis. Tombs with paired female burials show evidence of more frequent offering deposits, suggesting that surviving friends and family members visited these companion tombs as units, maintaining the relationship between the deceased even after both were gone. We bring offerings for both our mothers together, as they wish to be together, appears in one visitor inscription. Paired male tombs show standard individual visiting patterns, each tomb maintained separately by that person's descendants. You're looking now at something that makes you smile through the melancholy. A tomb painting showing 2 women in the afterlife, sitting together under a tree playing senet, the ancient Egyptian board game. It's from the tomb of one of the paired sisters from the beginning of this section, and it's labelled, "As we played in life, so we will play in eternity." She commissioned an artist to paint her afterlife as she imagined it. Not solitary triumph, not individual resurrection, but simple companionship. Games with her sister, forever. The men's tomb paintings show the deceased before gods, in boats sailing to the afterlife, transformed into powerful beings. All solo journeys, all individual adventures. The practical provisions in paired female tombs sometimes include shared resources. A single large collection of grain labelled for both. Wine stores marked, "For our eternal celebrations together." Even combined Shabti workforces. The women weren't just planning to be near each other. They were planning to share afterlife resources, to continue the mutual support and cooperation that characterized their living relationships. Men's tombs, even when physically adjacent, maintained separate inventories, separate provisions, separate resource management. You're drifting now in the darkness, thinking about these women who refused to go into eternity alone, who planned and purchased and built connection into death itself. They understood that consciousness, if it continued, if the afterlife was real, would need relationship, would need companionship, would need the comfort of familiar voices and shared history. The men faced eternity as solo adventurers, confident in their individual ability to handle whatever came. Or maybe they just didn't think about the social dimension of death. Either way, the tombs reveal the difference. Women built communities in eternity. Men built monuments to themselves. And when the final darkness came, which approach would you prefer? To have prepared for solitary triumph, or to have ensured that someone you loved would be there beside you in the endless night? You're standing in a storage facility where the air itself seems scented, even after 3 millennia. The jars in front of you are sealed with wax and resin, and when the conservators carefully opened one for analysis, the laboratory filled with the ghost of frankincense and myrrh, of cedarwood and cinnamon, of flowers that haven't bloomed in 3,000 years but left their essence preserved in oil and time. This collection belonged to a woman named Nefertiti, the fourth one UV encountered, a merchant's wife who spent 32 years accumulating perfumes and aromatic substances for her afterlife. The inventory is staggering. 47 jars of scented oils, each labelled with contents and source. Myrrh from Punt, year 7 of Thutmose III. Frankincense, first quality purchased from Syrian traders. Lotus oil, extracted by my own hands. Cedar essence, gift from my daughter. She documented everything, creating an aromatic autobiography, each scent a memory preserved in molecular form. Her husband's tomb contains 2 jars of oil, unscented, functional, probably meant for lamp fuel rather than fragrance. He apparently planned to spend eternity smelling like nothing in particular. Welcome to the perfume wars, where women stockpiled aromatic arsenals for eternity, and men showed up to the afterlife smelling like they'd just finished working in the fields, which, according to Assyrian theology, they probably would be. The numbers reveal an obsession. In a study of 178 intact tombs from the New Kingdom period, women's burials contained an average of 33 jars of scented substances. Men's burials averaged 3, and those 3 were often cooking oil, lamp oil, and maybe 1 jar of basic myrrh for the mummification process. Practical substances, not luxury fragrances. Women treated scent as essential to identity, to presentation, to eternal self-recognition. Men treated it as optional, possibly frivolous, certainly not worth the expense. You're reading now from a perfumer's business records, and the customer patterns are almost comically gender-divided. Women's orders: 6 deben of the finest lotus oil concentrated for my tomb collection. Frankincense tears, large pieces, no powder, I will grind them myself when needed. Your best myrrh, and I mean best. I smelled what you sold to Hennetmeyer and I want better. Men's orders: whatever oil is cheap, enough to fill 2 jars. No smaller jars, just 1 jar is fine. The scent vocabulary in women's tomb inscriptions is elaborate and specific. They don't just list oil, they list oil of lilies extracted in the 4th month, myrrh resin from the tall trees of Punt, frankincense of temple quality, cinnamon bark oil aged 3 years. They're connoisseurs, collectors, treating perfume preparation with the seriousness some people bring to wine cellaring. Men's tomb inscriptions rarely mention scents at all, and when they do, it's generic. Oils for purification, or substances for the ritual. No specificity, no passion, no detailed aromatic planning. Historians still argue whether women's perfume obsession reflects greater concern with sensory experience in the afterlife, better understanding of perfume's religious and magical properties, or simply that women were the primary users and creators of perfumes in life and extended that expertise to death? You suspect all three factors played roles, but the evidence leans heavily toward the first. Women were preparing for an afterlife of sensation, while men prepared for an afterlife of function. The preservation techniques women use for their aromatic substances are remarkably sophisticated. You're examining jars sealed with multiple layers: wax, resin, then linen soaked in more resin, then a final wax coat. Some jars were stored in sealed boxes, which were stored in sealed chests, creating multiple barriers against degradation. Chemical analysis shows these preservation methods worked. Some substances retained fragrance for thousands of years. The women who sealed these jars knew exactly what they were doing. Men's oil storage tends toward put it in a jar, seal it once, hope for the best. Do you remember Lady Hanutmahit with the elaborate food collection? Her perfume collection is equally impressive. 53 jars of scented substances organised by type and arranged by usage purpose. She has daily fragrances for ordinary eternity, festival scents for special occasions in the afterlife, and sacred perfumes for approaching the gods. She's planned for an afterlife with enough variety and social complexity that different occasions would require different scents. Her husband has 2 jars of basic oil, probably added to his tomb by a son who thought, "Should Dad have some oil?" Yeah, probably. The personal creation of perfumes adds another dimension. Many women didn't just purchase finished scents, they made their own. Tomb paintings sometimes show women grinding resins, extracting flower essences, mixing oils according to personal recipes. One woman's tomb contains not just finished perfumes, but also raw materials: blocks of frankincense, myrrh tears, dried flower petals, even a grinding stone with aromatic residue still clinging to its surface. She brought her perfume laboratory to the afterlife, presumably to continue creating scents for eternity. Men's tombs contain finished products at best, never the tools and materials for ongoing creation. The gift economy around perfumes is predominantly female. Women gave each other aromatic substances as valuable gifts, and these gifts often ended up designated for tombs. Lotus oil from my sister Henut, too precious to use in life, save for eternity. Frankincense given by my mother on my wedding day, that I may remember her scent beyond death. These women were creating scent-based memory archives, using perfume to encode relationships and moments they wanted to carry forward. Men exchanged perfumes rarely, and when they did, it was transactional rather than emotional. Payment for services, trade goods, not relationship tokens. The religious dimensions of perfume are significant. Incense and aromatic oils were used in temple rituals, in mummification, in offerings to gods. Women who brought extensive perfume collections were bringing the tools of religious participation, ensuring they could continue performing rituals, making offerings, maintaining relationships with the divine in the afterlife. Men brought enough for basic ritual requirements, not for ongoing religious practice across eternity. You're examining now a particularly beautiful set of perfume containers. Alabaster jars carved so thin they're translucent, shaped like lotus flowers and sacred animals, each one a work of art. They belong to a woman named Taweret, and the containers themselves cost more than the perfumes inside. She wanted beauty as well as scent, wanted the visual pleasure of lovely objects alongside the olfactory pleasure of their contents. Her husband's oil jars are functional ceramic with basic stoppers. They hold liquid. That's their entire design philosophy. The layering of scents suggests women thought about aromatic complexity in ways that seem almost modern. Some jars contain mixtures, myrrh and lotus combined, frankincense with cinnamon essence, cedar and rose together. Women were creating custom scent profiles, signature fragrances that expressed individual identity and taste. Men's jars contained single substances, unmixed, basic. The connection between scent and memory is something women seem to have understood intuitively. Multiple tomb inscriptions reference wanting to smell as I smelled in youth, or carry the fragrance of my wedding day, or bring the scent of my garden beyond death. They understood that smell is powerfully linked to memory and identity, that recognizing yourself in the afterlife might require smelling like yourself. Men's tomb texts don't discuss scent and identity at all. Bodies would be preserved, names would be remembered, but the sensory experience of selfhood, not apparently a concern. The aromatics trade records show that women were willing to pay extraordinary prices for exceptional scents. One papyrus documents a woman paying the equivalent of 4 months' household income for a small jar of aged myrrh from Punt. When her husband questioned the purchase, her response was recorded by a gleeful scribe who found it entertaining. "You spend money on beer you will drink once. I spend money on perfume I will wear for eternity. Which is the wiser investment?" You're laughing quietly there in the dark because she had a point, didn't she? The practical aspect shouldn't be overlooked. Perfumes weren't just luxury items. They had preservative properties, insect-repelling qualities, and religious significance. Women who stockpiled frankincense and myrrh were bringing multifunctional substances that could purify, preserve, and please the gods. But let's be honest, they also just wanted to smell good forever. Men wanted to get through the afterlife successfully. Women wanted to get through the afterlife successfully while smelling like a garden in spring. Both approaches are valid, but only one involves 47 jars of carefully curated aromatic excellence. You're carefully unfolding a piece of linen so delicate it feels like touching air with substance. The fabric is 3,000 years old and somehow, miraculously, it's still intact, still showing the intricate embroidery work along its border. Lotus flowers in blue thread, golden scarabs, hieroglyphs spelling protective spells, all stitched by hand with thread so fine you need magnification to see individual strands. This garment belonged to a woman named Nefertari. Yes, another one, the name recycled endlessly through Egyptian history, and it's one of 43 complete outfits she packed for the afterlife. 43. Different styles, different qualities, different purposes. Daily wear for ordinary eternity, festival garments for celebrations, ritual clothing for approaching gods, sleeping robes for eternal rest. She'd been collecting and creating these garments for 28 years. Some were commissioned from professional weavers. Some she made herself, the stitches irregular with love and anxiety. Each piece was wrapped separately in protective linen labelled with wearing occasions, stored in cedar chests with aromatic herbs to prevent insect damage. She prepared her eternal wardrobe with the thoroughness of someone planning for an actual life with actual social situations, requiring appropriate dress. Her husband's tomb contains one linen kilt. One. It's nicely made, probably his best one from life, but it's singular. He apparently planned to wear the same outfit for all of eternity's occasions, meeting gods, working fields, attending festivals, just existing. One outfit. Forever. Welcome to the textile divide, where women packed steamer trunks full of clothing options and men brought one good shirt and called it sufficient. The numbers are almost absurd. In a comprehensive textile analysis of New Kingdom tombs, women's burials contained an average of 31 complete garments beyond their mummification wrappings. Men's burials averaged 2.3. That. 3 represents partial garments, scraps, or items so damaged they barely count. Women brought wardrobes. Men brought the clothes on their backs, technically around their mummified backs, and maybe one backup tunic. You're reading now from a weaver's workshop inventory, and the commission patterns reveal everything. Women's orders specify 5 kilts in varying weights for different eternal seasons, 3 festival dresses with embroidered borders, 2 sleeping robes of the softest linen, 4 shawls for cool evenings in the afterlife, should such exist, 1 ceremonial robe with gold thread for approaching Osiris. The orders go on for pages, detailed specifications about thread count, fabric weight, decoration styles, appropriate colours for different afterlife occasions, men's orders, 1 kilt, good quality, standard length. The embroidery is where women's textile preparation becomes art. These aren't just functional garments, they're canvases for protection spells, religious devotion, and personal identity. You're examining a dress with borders completely covered in tiny hieroglyphic inscriptions, each one a protective spell or beneficial phrase. The woman who commissioned this, or created it herself, spent hundreds of hours stitching magic into fabric, turning clothing into wearable prayer. Men's garments, when decorated at all, have simple borders or basic patterns, functional markers of status, not elaborate magical texts. Historians still argue whether women's extensive clothing collections reflect greater anxiety about presentation in the afterlife, better understanding that eternity might involve varied social situations, or simply the practical extension of how women approached clothing in life. With attention to detail, variety, and appropriate dress for different occasions, you're learning toward all of the above, plus women actually thought about what it would mean to exist as a conscious being for eternity, while men apparently didn't think that far ahead. The seasonal variation in women's clothing collections is particularly interesting because it reveals assumptions about the afterlife's physical nature. Women packed light summer linens and heavier winter garments, suggesting they believed the afterlife would have weather, temperature variation, physical sensations that would require different clothing responses. Men's single garments suggest they either expected eternal mild weather or didn't consider temperature at all. Do you remember Mutnojmet with her elaborate servant army and complex tomb architecture? Her textile collection matches her other preparations. 67 complete garments organised by season, occasion, and ritual purpose. She has 7 different sleeping robes because apparently she believed the afterlife would include actual sleep requiring comfortable nightwear. She has 12 festival dresses for different celebrations. She has working garments for practical activities, ritual robes for religious observances, and social clothing for receiving eternal visitors. Her husband has 1 kilt and 1 shirt. If the afterlife has dress codes, he's going to be perpetually underdressed. The fabric quality gradient reveals long-term collection strategies. You're examining a woman's garment collection chronologically based on weaving style, and you can track her economic journey through textile quality. Early garments, coarse linen, basic construction, clearly made during less prosperous years. Middle period, better quality, more decoration, commissioned from professional weavers. Late garments, extraordinary quality, gold thread, elaborate embroidery, the work of master craftsmen. She'd been upgrading her eternal wardrobe throughout her life, replacing older items with better versions, constantly improving what she'd bring to the afterlife. Men's 1 or 2 garments show no evidence of this iterative improvement. They grabbed something nice and considered the clothing question resolved. The personal creation of garments adds another layer. Many women didn't just commission clothing, they made it themselves. Tombs contain not just finished garments, but also weaving tools, spinning equipment, needles, thread, and partially completed projects. One woman's burial includes a dress that's 90% finished, with the needle still threaded in the fabric. She'd been working on it when she died, and her family included the unfinished project in her tomb, perhaps hoping she'd complete it in the afterlife. Men's tombs contain finished garments only, never the tools of textile creation. The specific occasions women planned for are fascinating. You're reading labels on wrapped garments. For my first appearance before Osiris, for festivals in the field of reeds, for ordinary days in eternity, for visiting with my mother should we be reunited, for sleeping that I may rest comfortably, for working should labour be required. They anticipated a complex afterlife with varied activities requiring appropriate dress. Men's garment, when labelled at all, for burial. The colour symbolism in women's clothing reveals sophisticated understanding of religious significance. White for purity, red for vitality, yellow for gold and eternal life, green for resurrection, blue for the heavens. Women's wardrobes incorporate all these colours in appropriate contexts. Red garments for vitality-focused rituals, white for purification, green for resurrection festivals. Men's garments are overwhelmingly plain white linen, symbolically pure, yes, but also boring. The size variations suggest women planned for physical changes in the afterlife. Some garments in a single woman's collection are different sizes, smaller ones perhaps representing her youthful body she hoped to regain, larger ones acknowledging her current form. She was preparing for multiple possible versions of her eternal self. Men brought one size and presumably hoped their afterlife body would fit it. The jewellery and accessories accompanying garments create complete outfits. Women didn't just pack dresses, they packed the belts, pins, clasps and ornaments that would make each outfit complete and wearable. Some garments have matching jewellery sets wrapped with them, labelled as coordinated ensembles for specific occasions. Men's single garment comes with no accessories, no styling tools, no coordination considerations. You're examining now a particularly elaborate outfit, a pleated linen dress with a fringe shawl, matching belt, coordinating jewellery, and even the sandals meant to be worn with it. The entire ensemble is wrapped together and labelled, "For my reunion with my husband in the afterlife, that I may look as he remembers me looking on our wedding day." This woman was planning her eternal reunion outfit, choosing clothing that would trigger specific memories and recognition. Her husband brought his one kilt. He'll be delighted to see her, presumably, regardless of what he's wearing. The practical considerations shouldn't be overlooked. Linen is functional fabric, cool, comfortable, practical for hot climates. Women who brought extensive linen wardrobes were preparing for physical existence in the afterlife, for bodies that would sweat and need comfort and require changing clothes occasionally because eternity is a long time to wear the same outfit. Men brought minimal clothing and apparently expected minimal physical existence. The textile storage systems are sophisticated. Women wrapped garments in protective outer linen, added herbs to prevent insect damage, stored everything in sealed chests with aromatic resins, created inventory lists. They were preserving these clothes as carefully as they preserved their own bodies, ensuring that fabric and form would both survive into eternity intact. Men's single garment was usually just in the tomb somewhere, maybe wrapped, maybe not. No particular preservation strategy beyond basic inclusion. You're drifting now, thinking about these women carefully folding dress after dress after dress, wrapping each one, labelling occasions, imagining the eternal life that would require such variety. They were planning for consciousness, for ongoing existence with social dimensions and practical needs, and varied occasions requiring appropriate presentation. The men brought one good kilt and assumed that would cover all possible eternal situations. And maybe it would. But the women weren't taking chances. They'd learned in life that presentation matters, that different occasions require different approaches, that having options is always better than not having options. So they packed their eternal closets like they were moving to a new country where the climate was uncertain, the social customs unfamiliar, and the duration of their stay would be technically forever. You're holding something that seems impossibly fragile and impossibly resilient at the same time, a wooden harp, its strings long since deteriorated but the instrument itself intact, decorated with inlaid ivory and gold leaf. The sound box is painted with a scene of a woman playing this exact harp in a garden, surrounded by birds and flowering trees. This belonged to a woman named Hanutmahit. You've lost count of which Hanutmahit this is, maybe the 7th, and it's one of 3 musical instruments she brought to the afterlife. 3, a harp, a lute, and a set of clappers used for rhythm in religious ceremonies. She also brought sheet music, if you can call it that. Papyrus scrolls with musical notation, song lyrics, hymns to various gods, even what appears to be a personal composition labelled "Song for My Entrance into Eternity" to be played upon my arrival. She composed her own afterlife entrance music. She brought the instruments to perform it. She prepared for an eternity that would include sound, rhythm, melody, music as a component of ongoing existence. Her husband's tomb contained silence. No instruments, no music notation, nothing. He apparently expected the afterlife to provide its own soundtrack, or maybe he just never considered whether eternity would include music at all. Welcome to the final preparation divide. Women brought art, music, entertainment, and beauty into death, while men brought the essentials and assumed aesthetics would take care of themselves. The musical instrument statistics are stark. In a survey of 347 private tombs from the New Kingdom through late period, 106 contained musical instruments. 98 of those tombs belonged to women, 8 belonged to men, and 6 of those 8 were professional musicians whose instruments were work tools rather than afterlife entertainment choices. Women understood that eternity might be long and possibly boring without something to do, something to create, something to fill the endless hours with beauty and sound. Men apparently never considered the entertainment question. You're reading now from the tomb biography of a woman named Nefertari, a different one, always a different one, who held the title Singer in the Temple of Amun. Her tomb contains 5 instruments, 2 harps of different sizes, a lute, a drum, and a sistrum, the ritual rattle used in religious ceremonies. She also brought extensive musical notation, instruction texts for playing techniques, and a collection of hymns spanning religious and secular repertoire. This woman was preparing to continue her musical career in the afterlife, to keep performing, creating, participating in the sonic dimension of eternity. Her husband was a scribe. He brought writing equipment, papyrus, ink, reed pens, suggesting he also expected to continue his profession beyond death. So men did prepare for ongoing work, ongoing identity, ongoing purpose. They just didn't prepare for beauty, entertainment, or the aesthetic dimensions of eternal existence. Historians still argue whether women's inclusion of musical instruments reflects their roles as primary music makers in Egyptian society, greater anxiety about eternal boredom, or simply more holistic thinking about what constitutes a life. Work, yes, but also art, beauty, pleasure, creation. The evidence suggests women thought about quality of eternal existence, not just the fact of continued existence. The song inscriptions are particularly revealing. Women's tomb walls sometimes include complete song lyrics, hymns to be sung, musical directions for performance. One tomb contains this beautiful inscription: "Song to be sung by my daughter at my tomb on festival days, that the sound of her voice may reach me in the field of reeds, and I may know I am remembered." She's planning not just for her own musical performance, but for music to connect the living and the dead, to maintain relationships across the boundary through shared sound. Men's tombs contain prayers and spells meant to be recited, but rarely music meant to be performed for pleasure or connection. The variety of instruments in women's tombs suggests they expected varied musical situations. Small hand drums for personal rhythm keeping, clappers for religious ceremonies, harps and lutes for entertainment and personal enjoyment. Women weren't just bringing one instrument, they were bringing ensembles, preparing for different musical needs and occasions. The 8 men with instruments brought one each, usually the instrument they played professionally in life. Do you remember the paired sisters who planned to spend eternity together? Their tombs both contain musical instruments. One sister has a harp, the other has a lute. The placement suggests they plan to play together to make music as a shared eternal activity. The tomb painting shows exactly this. The 2 sisters in the afterlife, one playing harp, one playing lute, creating harmony together beyond death. You find no equivalent male companion burials planning eternal jam sessions. The non-musical artistic items follow the same pattern. Women's tombs contain gaming boards, senet, hounds and jackals, other strategy games, presumably for eternal entertainment. They contain art supplies, palettes for painting, grinding stones for pigments, brushes. They contain craft materials, spinning equipment, weaving tools, sewing implements. Women were preparing for an afterlife of creation, activity, engaged existence. Men's tombs contain work tools if they were craftsmen, but rarely recreational or artistic items. Their eternal existence was apparently all business. The Senate boards are particularly common in women's tombs and particularly elaborate. Senate was both a game and a religious symbol. The board represented the journey through the afterlife. But women's Senate boards often show heavy useware, suggesting these were personal possessions played frequently in life and brought to death for continued use. They weren't just religious symbols, they were actual games for actual playing. Men's Senate boards, when present, tend to be formal funerary versions, unused, purely symbolic. The craft continuation is beautiful when you think about it. Women brought spinning whirls and weaving equipment not because they'd need to make their own clothes in the afterlife. They'd already packed extensive wardrobes, but because they enjoyed the activity, found meaning in creation, wanted the option to make beautiful things for eternity. They were preparing for engaged existence, for hands that would want to stay busy, for minds that would need creative outlets. Men brought tools for necessary work, but rarely equipment for creative pleasure. You're examining now a painting set from a woman's tomb, grinding stones for making pigments, brushes in various sizes, a palette with paint residue still visible, papyrus prepared for painting, and a small scroll with painting instruction notes. She was an artist. She wanted to remain an artist beyond death. So she brought her studio, complete and ready for eternal creation. Her husband was also an artist, a sculptor. He brought nothing. No tools, no materials, no indication that he expected or wanted to continue creating after death. Perhaps he saw his work as earthly labour that would end with death. Perhaps he never considered the question. Either way, he brought silence and stillness to eternity, while she brought the possibility of ongoing creation. The entertainment question reveals fundamentally different approaches to eternity. Women prepared for the possibility that afterlife might include leisure, pleasure, boredom requiring relief, long periods needing filling with beauty and activity. Men prepared for judgment, labour, triumph, transformation, all important, yes, but not addressing the question of what you do with eternity once you've been judged, laboured, triumphed and transformed. The tomb paintings support this interpretation. Women's tomb art often shows afterlife scenes of pleasure. Gardens, feasting, music making, game playing, family gatherings. Men's tomb art shows religious scenes, judgment, transformation, demonstrations of power. Both are valid visions of eternity, but only one looks like something you'd actually want to experience forever. The instruction manuals some women included are touching. Instructions for playing the harp, lest I forget during my death sleep. Songs my mother taught me, written here so I may teach them to others in the field of reeds. Directions for weaving the complicated border pattern I developed, preserved for eternity. They were documenting skills, preserving knowledge, ensuring that death wouldn't erase what they'd learned and created in life. Men's instruction texts, when they exist, are professional. The correct procedure for measuring a field, the proper technique for mixing pigments, work knowledge, not personal creation. You're sitting in the darkness now, and somewhere a museum climate control system hums softly, maintaining the precise conditions that keep these 3,000-year-old instruments from crumbling into dust. You're thinking about Hnuttmahit composing her entrance music, practicing on her harp, imagining the moment when she'd cross from life to death and would need the perfect song for that transition. Did she perform it? Is there some version of an afterlife where she arrived playing her harp, her own composition announcing her presence to the gods? Or did the instruments simply decay in her tomb, the music never played, the silence absolute? Either way, she prepared. She brought beauty, possibility, the tools of creation and pleasure. She refused to go into eternity empty-handed, carrying only essentials. She brought her art, her music, her capacity for joy, her expectation that existence, even eternal existence, should include moments of beauty and sound. Her husband brought himself and assumed that would be enough, and maybe it was, but her approach seems wiser, doesn't it? Better to bring the harp and not need it than to need the harp and not have it. Better to prepare for an eternity of beauty than to assume eternity will be beautiful without any effort on your part. You're standing in a conservation laboratory where hundreds of tomb inventories are spread across tables like archaeological playing cards, and you've been comparing them for hours now, running the numbers, checking patterns, verifying what your eyes and instincts have been telling you throughout this entire journey through ancient preparation. The women prepared more, significantly, measurably, undeniably more. The comprehensive analysis is stunning. Across every category, textiles, food, cosmetics, amulets, servants, architecture, everything. Women's tombs contain roughly 60% more items than men's tombs when controlled for social class and wealth. 60%. That's not a small difference, not statistical noise, not sampling bias. That's a pattern so consistent across 3,000 years of Egyptian history that it might as well be a law of nature. Women prepared for the afterlife approximately 1.5 times more thoroughly than men. The numbers break down like this. In a match pair analysis of 247 married couples buried in the Theban necropolis, women averaged 372 separate preparation items. Men averaged 233. Women brought more categories of items: musical instruments, extensive cosmetics, elaborate food collections, multiple clothing options. Men brought standard packages, the essentials, the requirements, the bare minimum to get through eternal judgment and labour. You're reading now from a comprehensive archaeological survey conducted across multiple sites, time periods, and social classes, and the pattern holds everywhere. New Kingdom, late period, Ptolemaic era, doesn't matter. Upper class, middle class, working poor, doesn't matter. Thebes, Memphis, provincial cemeteries, doesn't matter. Everywhere archaeologists look, women prepared more extensively, more carefully, more thoroughly than men. Historians still argue about why. Whether it reflects differential anxiety, different cultural expectations, more time available for preparation, better organisational skills, or fundamentally different relationships with mortality. The arguments continue, the theories multiply, the debates rage on. But the evidence doesn't change. The women prepared more. The time investment differentials are equally stark. Based on tomb biographies, commissioning records, and workshop documentation, women began afterlife preparation an average of 23 years before death. Men began an average of 6 years before death, with many starting only in their final year or even final months. Women spent decades accumulating, planning, organising. Men spent months grabbing what seemed necessary. The cost analysis reveals that women typically spent between 35 and 60% of their lifetime discretionary income on afterlife preparation. Men spent between 8 and 20%. Women were investing in eternity at rates 3 to 5 times higher than men. They were directing substantial resources toward death preparation, while men directed those resources elsewhere: property, business investments, immediate consumption. Were the women wiser or more fearful? Were the men confident or negligent? The tombs can't answer those questions. They can only show what was actually done, and what was done is clear. Women prepared as if the afterlife were real and demanding. Men prepared as if it would probably work out somehow. The quality gradients tell stories of long-term planning. You're examining a woman's complete tomb inventory chronologically, tracking acquisition dates, and you can see her preparation arc. Started simple at age 27 with basic amulets and some linen. Expanded at 35 after her first child's birth made mortality suddenly real. Accelerated at 43 when her mother died and she inherited some preparation items. Intensified at 52 when her own health declined, and death became a near rather than distant prospect. By her death at 61, she'd accumulated an inventory that would take archaeologists 3 months to catalogue. Her husband's preparation arc: nothing, nothing, nothing. Sudden panic buying in the last year of life. The emotional labour of preparation is something the statistics can't quite capture, but the artefacts reveal. Every carefully wrapped package, every labelled jar, every organised chest represents hours of thought, planning, anxiety management, hope maintenance. Women perform this emotional labour continuously over decades. The constant awareness that death was coming and needed preparing for. The ongoing management of mortality anxiety through practical action. Men largely avoided this emotional labour until death was imminent, then compressed it into frantic final preparations. Do you remember all the women you've encountered on this journey? Nefertari with her 3-room tomb and escape routes. Hinutmahit with her elaborate food stores, Mutemwia with her extensive cosmetics, Taweret with 347 amulets, Mutnodjemet with her servant army, the sisters planning eternal companionship, the mothers preparing for dead children. Every one of them spent years, decades engaged in the work of preparing for death while men around them were, what? Living more fully in the present? Avoiding uncomfortable thoughts, trusting that things would work out? The cultural explanations are complex. Some scholars argue that women's preparation thoroughness reflects their exclusion from public life and achievement, channeling their energies into the one arena where they had control, their own deaths. Others argue it reflects women's roles as household managers, treating the afterlife as the ultimate household to be provisioned and organised. Still others suggest women simply took religious teachings more seriously, believed more deeply, feared more thoroughly. All those explanations probably contain truth. But there's something else too. Something the artifacts whisper if you listen carefully enough. Women understood that preparation itself was a form of control in an uncontrollable situation. Death was coming, inevitable, unstoppable, terrifying. You couldn't prevent it, but you could prepare for it. And in that preparation there was agency, power, a way of asserting that you weren't just a passive victim of mortality, but an active participant in your own eternal destiny. Men seemed to approach death with a kind of philosophical acceptance or denial that required less physical manifestation. They'd face it when it came, deal with it in the moment, trust in their ability to navigate whatever challenges the afterlife presented. It's not that they didn't care. The religious texts they commissioned, the prayers they had inscribed, the spells they included proved they cared deeply. They just didn't express that care through extensive material preparation. The practical outcomes are unknowable. Did the women's thorough preparation actually help them in the afterlife? Did the men's minimal preparation disadvantage them? The tombs hold no answers to those questions because the tombs only tell us about preparation, not results. We can see what people brought to death, but we can't see whether it mattered once they got there. What we can see is that preparation itself mattered to the people doing it. The women who spent 30 years accumulating afterlife supplies found meaning, control, and purpose in that accumulation. The activity itself was valuable. It gave structure to mortality anxiety, transformed fear into action, provided concrete tasks in the face of existential terror. The gender divide isn't really about who prepared better. It's about different ways of handling the fundamental human problem of mortality. Women chose preparation, accumulation, detailed planning. Men chose trust, last-minute action, faith that things would work out. Both approaches have merit. Both represent valid ways of being human in the face of death. But the archaeological record is unambiguous about which approach produced more stuff. The women prepared more extensively, more carefully, more thoroughly across every measurable dimension. 60% more items, 3 times the time investment, 5 times the financial commitment, more categories, more quality, more thought, more care, more everything. You're sitting there in the darkness now, surrounded by the evidence of 3,000 years of human preparation for death, And you're thinking about the women who wrapped linen for decades, who commissioned custom amulets, who designed elaborate tombs, who assembled servant armies, who packed wardrobes for eternity. You're thinking about their anxiety, their thoroughness, their refusal to leave anything to chance. And you're thinking about the men who grabbed the essentials in their final months and hoped for the best. Their confidence or their denial, their trust in themselves or their avoidance of uncomfortable preparation. Both groups ended up in the same place. Dead, buried, eventually excavated by archaeologists who would catalogue their preparations and wonder about their thoughts. The afterlife, if it existed, didn't send back reports on who prepared correctly. The gods, if they were watching, didn't issue grades on tomb inventory completeness. But the women prepared anyway. They prepared as if it mattered, as if thoroughness would be rewarded, as if the afterlife was a real place with real requirements that demanded real preparation. They prepared because preparation was what they could control, what they could do, what gave them power in the face of powerlessness. And maybe that's the whole story right there. Not that women were wiser or men were foolish. Not that preparation guaranteed anything or that confidence was unjustified. Just that, in the face of universal mortality, women found meaning in thorough preparation and men found meaning elsewhere. The tombs remain, the artifacts survive, and the numbers tell their tale. The women prepared more carefully than the men, 60% more carefully, measured by any metric you choose. That's not judgment. It's just archaeology. It's just counting, measuring, recording what ancient people left behind. But as you drift towards sleep now, letting the information settle into your consciousness like dust settling in an open tomb, you can't help wondering, if you were facing eternity, which approach would you choose? Would you be Nefertari with 300 items carefully collected over decades? Or would you be Amenhotep with 30 items grabbed in the final months? Would you prepare as if it mattered? Or would you trust that it would all work out somehow? The women chose preparation. They chose thoroughness, care, control, decades of accumulation and planning. They brought everything they might need and then brought more, just to be safe. The men chose trust. They chose confidence, last-minute action, faith in their ability to handle whatever came. Both groups went into eternity, both hoped for the best. But only one group bought 300 items instead of 30. Only one group refused to take chances. Only one group prepared as if their eternal lives depended on it. And perhaps, in ways we'll never know, they did. The journey through ancient tombs is ending now. The artifacts are being carefully returned to their climate-controlled storage. The inventories are being filed away. The numbers have been counted, the patterns recognized, the story told. You've walked through 3,000 years of human preparation for death, and you've seen how differently men and women approach the same inevitable destination. You've counted their items, read their inscriptions, examined their choices. You've seen anxiety transformed into action, fear converted into preparation, mortality acknowledged through material accumulation. The women prepared more. That's the simple truth. They brought more items, spent more time, invested more resources, planned more carefully. They prepared for an afterlife that was complex, demanding, social, sensory, an eternity that would require clothing and food and music and companionship and protection and beauty. The men prepared less. They brought the essentials, made last-minute arrangements, trusted in their ability to navigate whatever challenges arose. They prepared for judgment, labour, transformation, the official requirements of eternity without the daily details of eternal existence. Neither approach was wrong. Both represented human attempts to grasp the ungraspable, to prepare the unprepared for, to assert control over the fundamentally uncontrollable fact of mortality. But as you sink deeper into sleep now, the images fading, the information dissolving into dreams, you carry with you the knowledge of those women who spent lifetimes preparing for death. Women who wrapped linen for decades, who collected amulets like armor, who designed tombs with escape routes, who prepared their children's afterlives along with their own, who brought harps to eternity because silence was unthinkable. They prepared as if it mattered, and perhaps it did. Perhaps it does. Perhaps preparation itself is what matters. The choosing, the planning, the caring enough to try. Rest now. Let the images of ancient tombs fade into comfortable darkness. Let the numbers blur into sleep. Let the story of human preparation for death settle into your unconscious mind, where all stories ultimately go to rest. The women prepared more carefully than the men. That's the tale. That's the mystery. That's the truth archaeology reveals and eternity keeps secret. Sleep well. Dream of harps in tombs, of carefully wrapped linens, of women who refuse to go into eternity unprepared. Sweet dreams.